Thank you. Welcome to Oxfordshire County Council's Performance and Corporate Service Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Glynis Phillips, representing Barton, Sandhills and Risinghurst in the centre, and the rest of the committee will introduce themselves, starting with the Deputy Chair.
Ian Middleton, I represent Kiddington East.
Brad Baines, representing ISIS Division, Oxford City.
Councillor Ian Walker, Humber and Hayley.
Councillor Judy Roberts, representing North Hinksey Division.
Lee Evans, Kingston and Stanford, and I'm substituting for Kieran Mallon.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Rod Smith. I represent Headington Quarry, a division in the City District Council area.
I'm Councillor Ron Batstone and I represent Grove.
Thank you, and we're ably supported by Tom Hudson, and all the other speakers will introduce themselves as we go along. So for the minutes, can we have apologies for absence and temporary appointments, please?
Apologies for absence. Apologies from Councillor Sherry, for whom Councillor Roberts is substituting, Councillor Mallon, for whom Councillor Evans is substituting, and Councillor Greenaway, for whom Councillor Smith is substituting.
Thank you, and special thanks to the substitutes. So going through the agenda, any declarations of interest at this stage? None, thank you. The minutes, these are pages 9 to 12. We have two sets of minutes to look at. If we start with a meeting on the 17th of April, I'll go through it page by page, starting at page 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 and 20. So they're an accurate set of minutes. And then the meeting on the 12th of May, that's just one page. Are we content with those? So thank you. So the minutes are agreed. Any petitions or public addresses?
None, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5. This is the Business Management and Monitoring Report and Capital Outturn Report, but we're focusing on the Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue Service and community safety. And we welcome Chief Fire Officer Bob Dougal and Kathy Wilcox, who's going to start this agenda item. Thank you.
Hello, Councillor Fawcett.
Morning, morning everybody. I'm Kathy Wilcox, I'm Head of Corporate Finance. So I'm going to start off just with a brief overview of what the report is, and then I'll hand over to Rob and others as relevant to add to this with some more context. So this report brings together updates, finance, performance and risk, focuses on Oxfordshire Fire and Rescue and community safety this time, but to note this is one of a series of updates, rolling updates through the year that you've been considering and will continue to consider. So just really high-level overview, 25/6, the service reported a small overspend of £0.5 million against a budget of £32.6 million. There was an overspend of £0.6 million for fire and rescue, offset by an underspend of £0.1 million for trading standards. There's £3.4 million held in reserves at year end, most or almost all of that related to funding for vehicles and equipment. Performance across all reported measures is strong, as set out in the annex to the report, with indicators rated green, reflecting continued delivery against key priorities, including community safety, health and tackling inequalities. It also notes capital expenditure, including £1.3 million of investment in fleet and equipment in 25-26, and that's largely funded from the funding held in the reserves for the service. So the committee is recommended to consider the report, raise any questions and agree any recommendations it wishes to make to Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you. Has the committee got any questions on the finance aspect of this report? I think there was a question about the comment about the Carterton Community Safety Centres currently on hold. And if you could explain why that is, please.
Yeah, thank you. obviously Rob McDougall, the Chief Officer, Director of Community Safety. So we are, the situation in Carlton is we have a temporary fire station. We have a piece of land which is Compton 106 where we are will build a new fire station. We have plans and we have some capital funding for that project, but we don't have enough money yet to start the project, and we're looking at the options of how we can find that capital to do it, which is the continuing challenges we have. We have to balance that with the fact we have a fire crew there who are responding. And again, one of our incredible on-call fire crews doing really well, but we would benefit from having a permanent station, both because of the facilities and the location. So it's that ongoing challenge of we have some capital money put aside to build a new fire station. We are constantly reviewing how we can how do we get the build costs down and we get the capital funding up in order we can start the project, and that's the situation we're in.
Thank you. Councillor Middleton.
Yeah, it's just another question really under the government grants. There's a firefighters new dimension grant. What's that?
Yeah, thank you. Apologies for the terminology. So since as a result of obviously the terrible London bombings in 2007, we created a national resilience function across all UK fire and rescue services. That includes a number of functions that we deliver on a national basis, which includes urban search and rescue, includes managing hazardous chemical incidents, includes major flooding. And in Oxfordshire, we have 2 of those units. So at Banbury, we have our high volume pumping unit, which is again a fantastic vehicle that allows us to move large volumes of water and has been involved in a number of national flooding events. And we also have what we call a detection, identification and monitoring team, which is based at Bicester, which serves the Thames Valley, which allows our firefighters who are trained in scientific methods to go into operational situations and manage hazardous chemical incidents such as white powder, potential kind of chemicals that may be involved for various reasons. And we receive a national grant to provide that service, which is that money that comes in through that grant.
So does that also cover the specialist rescue tender at Kidlington?
No, it doesn't. It's so the specialist rescue tender is a function that we provide for Oxfordshire, which is funded by Oxfordshire, by our current funding model. The new dimensions asset is only the high volume pump and the detection, identification, monitoring team. The acronym for that is DIM, which is why I'm trying to avoid using it.
Sorry, I'm going to be done here. I'm not sure why. So why the specialist tender in Kidlington is, as I understand, completely unique to Oxfordshire. Why isn't that not covered by the additional grant?
So the additional grant is purely for those new dimension assets, which is a program of work around a number of things, the flooding assets, the hazardous chemicals and urban search and rescue. We do have some urban search and rescue facilities on the specialist rescue tender, but that existed before the grant funding. And just to be clear, having a specialist rescue provision is not unique to Oxfordshire. There's a number of most fire and rescue services will have need to have those specialist rescue functions. So and that's predominantly the water rescue, the line rescue, heavy vehicle rescue, and also animal rescue. And we have that provided through the specialist rescue vehicle in a kind of single vehicle in Kidlington, whereas the lots of different approaches have got different fire and rescue services. So maybe they have those separated out and maybe they have those combined. The point is about making sure you have the capability. The way that it's provided is individual services can determine that.
Thank you. I gather you've got a presentation, Chief Fire Officer.
Just to meet your request, Chair, that I've pulled a few slides together, which hopefully will be helpful just to go through a few things, mainly related to the work we're doing on the fire rescue cover model and the recent consultation that we went through. So hopefully it will seamlessly present. So again, I just wanted to take you through a few slides. They are quite number heavy, but it's really just to make sure I don't miss anything. Just to point out the rationale for the fire and rescue cover model, which was around managing our demand recognising that we have more incidents concentrated in daytime and the early evening. Around cover and the availability of our fire engines isn't aligned to our busiest periods. And then response times, and recognising that our response times are increasing. That's both nationally, but also particularly in Oxfordshire, which is why we're going through this transition and why the change is needed. Just wanted to share just a reminder of what we do as a fire rescue service. So we're going through the process of producing our annual report for financial year 25-26. So I thought it was useful to recognise we went to over 6,000 incidents in that time period. We attended just shy of 1,500 fires, 140 incidents involving flooding, and that's interesting in the fact we don't have a statutory duty for flooding, but a decision was made within the council almost 2 decades ago that as a fire rescue service we would respond to flooding, and funding was provided accordingly. We went to 83 animal rescues. We attended over 118 incidents where we assist other agencies, and that can be of various things, whether it's helping ambulance services gain access to buildings, or whether it's to do with managing patients for scares and those kind of incidents. We went to almost 350 road traffic collisions and over 50 incidents involving hazardous chemicals. The challenge we talked about through the consultation and the fire rescue cover model is this issue we have of our demand versus our availability. If you look at the grey bars in this chart, it's showing you the number of incidents we have through a time period during the day, and you can quite clearly see that increased demand during the day going into the early evening. And the orange line is the availability of our fire engines, so our on-call fire engines. So you see we've got this mismatch between when we have fire engines available and when the demand for incidents is. And that daytime demand is concentrated around commuting, commercial activity, and also general community risk. But as you say, it's almost 2.5 times greater during the day than it is at night. This is data I pulled out of our system yesterday. So this is up-to-date data for this year, which shows the number of fire engines we have during those time periods. So it's very similar to that line graph. But as you can see quite clearly, we have a majority of fire engines, the highest number of fire engines available during the night, but less so during the day. We operate on a degradation system, and we know that we can cover the county adequately with 15 fire engines. So it's only when we dip below 15 fire engines that we start to take additional measures to make sure we can provide an emergency response. And as you can see, during the night time, we aren't challenged by that, but during the day, we often get quite close to 15 fire engines. We are particularly affected by things like bank holidays, some holidays. So recently, over the half-term period and the bank holiday, we had to spend a significant amount of money on overtime to make sure we maintained 15 fire engines across the county. So really, it's just to reiterate the work we're doing around the fire rescue cover model, and those changes that we're looking at are essential to improve our fire rescue model to give it that sustainability going forward. And then just understanding, just wanted to be clear that obviously within the business, the monitoring report that you've seen, the data around that shows our average response time based on time. It also talks about the number of fires per residence, and again, strong performance in that area. And our response time, as we've targeted it for this year, is okay, but I do want to recognise that we have got these challenges with where we currently are. Our target is to reach 80% of incidents within 11 minutes and 95% within 14 minutes. Currently, we're getting to 70% of incidents within that 11-minute bracket, so we fall short of our target, and currently responding to 84% of incidents within that 14-minute bracket, so we are falling short of that 95% target. Our average response time is 9 minutes and 15 seconds, and that table in the bottom left-hand corner just shows you we've seen that steady increase in that response time over the last 4 years. The graph on the right-hand side, and I appreciate there's quite a few lines on there, but it's really the bright red line I want to draw your attention to, which is our performance across that time period, which is over the last 10 years. And you can see that the dotted blue line is what's considered intermediate rural, and they just recategorised this. It used to be called predominantly rural, but they're now called intermediate rural, which is our category. So if you want to look at different types of geography for fire and rescue services and how they manage, you can see our red line against that blue line is we are underperforming against fire and rescue services of a similar nature, which is obviously a concern for us, and we want to make sure we're improving those response times. But you can see there is a national trend of that increase over time. But that was just to draw your attention to the challenges we're facing. And then really, I thought you'd want to know where we are with the fire rescue self-cover model, because obviously there was a lot of conversation around the consultation, and as a result of that consultation, we put forward recommendations not to close the 3 fire stations that we were looking at, but we were also looking to bring back further work around the final design of the changes to shift patterns, which is how we move those resources into the daytime to try and manage the demand and improve our response times. And those conversations are currently going on. Today is the start of our staff working groups to look at the proposals in more detail and to get staff ideas how we do that. And that's jointly being run between the service and the FBU. And we've got a programme in place that we hope over the next couple of months we can agree what the shape of those shifts will look like and how we can best do that to achieve to kind of meet the challenges we're facing, which I've just laid out, but also making sure that our staff are as comfortable as they can be with the changes that we're proposing as we move into a new fire and rescue cover model.
Thank you. Are there any timescales linked to that new model?
There are. We are. So the piece we're starting today is looking at the how we move whole-time resources into the daytime to try and meet that demand. We've got a provisional timetable which hopes we can come back to the cabinet with some proposals in the autumn. So we're looking at that timescale with the look to implement next year. However, there are a number of things in that depending on what the outcome of the working groups is. So I can't give you any firm details because there are chances we may need to do additional modelling, we may need to do additional consultation depending on what the proposals are. But we are expected to come back to the cabinet with some for a final decision in the autumn.
Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Could I ask any sort of, I mean, the evidence that you've produced there is absolutely stark. I mean, it really is. And I think it would have been useful to have that information maybe for myself when I was answering residents' questions earlier this year when for the suggestion of closing any fire stations. But it's great to see it now. Thank you. Can I ask, are you doing any benchmarking against, I mean, those figures and showing other councils, I mean, as to with regard to the type and volume of incidents we're having to respond to in Oxfordshire? I'm told that house fires in particular have gone down, chip pans no longer used, that sort of thing. However, there is an increase, I'm told, and I'd like to know if this is true in Oxfordshire as well, with electric battery bike fires and also vape, I think, fires as well. I think one thing that's increased as well. Are we seeing that in Oxfordshire? Are we on the same sort of trend with incidents as similar counties around the country?
The short answer to that is yes. And we look at the data, and the government looks at the data across all different fire rescue services, and we can look at those trends and understand our trends against the national trends. We are seeing a reduction in the number of dwelling fires, so fires in homes, and we benchmark that, and the figure in the report is against 10,000 population. So we can look at how we fare against other areas, and it is very, very low for Oxfordshire. But we are certainly seeing those challenges with battery fires and what they mean. Largely, a lot of that is to do with recycling centres. We've had a couple of recycling fires and waste site fires, which we often attribute to lithium-ion batteries and appropriate disposal of those. So there is a message out there to try and, we have got pretty fantastic recycling facilities in Oxfordshire, and it's making sure that people use those effectively so those lithium-ion batteries aren't going into general waste, which is where they cause the problem. We are seeing challenges with scooter fires, and we're watching that trend very carefully. A lot of that is to do with those products that don't meet the standards, so imported products which aren't meeting the standards and they're being charged inappropriately. We're trying to make sure that people understand the challenges of not charging scooters in in people's means of escape, etc., etc., all those understandings. So all of that work is going on both locally and nationally. There aren't any particular trends, Oxfordshire, that we see against other areas of a similar nature. So we look at when we do our benchmarking, we don't just compare ourselves to London or Manchester or the big Mets. We look at our family group of services, so those that are similar to us. So good examples would be Warwickshire, Gloucestershire, and Buckinghamshire to a certain extent, where we can see a similar fire and rescue service, similar makeup, and understand those challenges. Response times is a really good example of where you have West Midlands, for example, where they can manage response times close to 5-6 minutes, but they cover a much smaller area with much more densely populated, and they have much more funding in order to resource that. Whereas Oxfordshire is one of the most rurally sparse areas in the southeast. So our challenge really is around what we can provide in order to meet that population.
I wanted to ask earlier when Councillor Middleton was asking about the 83k from the Home Office, this uplifting grant that you get. Is it enough to cover what we do, our costs, that 83 or not?
I would always welcome more grant. There is a challenge around. So again, the short answer is yes. It is just about enough to cover what we do. There are other challenges. We have a recharging mechanism. So, for example, if we send our high vehicle volume pumps on a national event, we have to send crews, we have to do that, and there is a charging mechanism to get that money back. It is constantly being reviewed and understanding what the provision is and how we do it. But it is. I would welcome more grant funding, and it would mean we could do more with it. But the reality is, it is okay, and we do use it within Oxfordshire as well. So there is a balance of what we get paid to provide the national response, based what we're paying for to deliver in Oxfordshire.
Thank you, Councillor Baines.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on some of the discussion just then from the question Councillor Smith about data and case making. What do you see? What's your view in terms of the adequacy of the sort of monitoring targets that are incorporated in part of the BMMR? Because a lot of the things you've pointed to in your the case for change, etc., don't fit into the regular monitoring as part of the BMMR. So do you think that the current targets and monitoring as part of the BMMR are appropriate, given what you said is that there's a case for change?
So I think there is obviously, as a fire rescue service and a chief fire officer, I'm looking at a much broader suite of key performance indicators to make sure the service is running how we want it to, and understand those challenges which we've laid out to try and make sure we can deliver the change needed to make the improvements. I think there is a balance between in a BMMR for the whole county organisation. We've had a number of discussions about what are the right level of metrics to understand that need to come in front of the broader committee to understand the council's overall performance. I obviously, as Councillor Fawcett, as my cabinet member, obviously present to him a much broader range of performance measures to understand how the service is performing. So I think there's always a balance between there are a number of key performance indicators which may be useful for the council leadership to understand, but you have to balance that against they're looking at a very broad dashboard of measures against the whole performance of the county council. So what we've tried to select within these measures is understanding the key elements of what do people expect from their fire and rescue service. When they call 999, they want a guaranteed fire engine and they want it there quickly, and that's around those response times. And also people want to understand that we're doing our prevention work in order to try and reduce the number of fires that are occurring, which is why you see those two main measures within the report.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Evans next. I'll take that on board, Councillor Fawcett, the request for more data.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Phillips. I think that's a really important question from Councillor Baines. And I think one of the aspects of this that is a genuine challenge is that the performance data that you're seeing is the data after Rob and his team have done a huge amount of work to move resources around within the system to maintain cover. So if Rob and the team didn't do that, some of those figures would be worse, a lot worse. And that also then leads into cost as well, because that involves that adds to things like the overtime bill. So the chief officer is quite correct. We do have a lot more detailed data behind that, and in the discussions I have with him, we go into those kind of factors quite a lot. But I think it's a fair point to make that probably didn't come out as clearly as it could have done in the previous discussions, and it is something that is now part of what I hope are going to be very constructive discussions with the FBU and staff as we take a very collaborative approach forward in trying to improve the model.
Thank you. Even at this stage, I think I'm going to propose that is a recommendation from this committee that routinely the council gets more information about the fire and rescue service, because the consultation included a lot of information which was new to a lot of people, because we don't keep abreast of the issues that you're dealing with on a daily basis. Thank you. Councillor Evans.
So,
Councillor Baines wants to go.
sorry, just on that point, I think it's important that, for example, some of the points that were just raised earlier about benchmarking versus equivalent fire services, which may or may not be integrated into councils like us, that serve similar geography. I think some of that needs to be kind of fed into some of the targets in terms of response time, or indeed, why is there not a regular measure in terms of the about the availability of fire engines staff? That sort of resilience measure needs to be incorporated in terms of the regular reporting.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Great, thank you. I have two questions, if I may. One of them builds on this point about data. On page 27, when we look at the average response time, for a county the size of Oxfordshire, a county-wide average doesn't necessarily feel like it's telling us all that much. I wonder, to what extent do you monitor by district, by urban versus rural, by response time to the particular nature of a call out? Without being unkind to our furby friends, I assume an animal rescue is slightly lower priority than a house fire. So how do you monitor that in slightly more granular detail?
Yeah, no, thank you. A really important question. So the short answer is yes, we look at different types of response time, whether that is in our on-call fire engines. On-call fire engines are going to take longer to respond to an incident because they have the 5-minute turnaround time of the crew, as opposed to a whole time where the crew is generally on station and ready to go. So we'll look at on-call response, we look at whole time response. We publish in our annual report, we publish our response times for the different district areas. So you can see those clear differences between how we meet our response targets in different areas. And we will be meeting that much more quickly in Oxford because we have 3 whole-time trucks compared to the district areas where we have less whole-time trucks. So we do all of that going forward. We do look at different response times, different incidents. So the graph I showed you with the national averages, that's looking at dwelling fires. So that's recognizing, that's responding to house fires. In essence, we also look at how we respond to road traffic collisions. The way we respond, although the driver will make a assessment of the type. So obviously, if they have to manage the road risk. If they're responding to what they know as a person's reported house fire, they're going to use the full extent of their skills to get there as quickly possible. If they're responding to, as you say, maybe an animal, a horse stuck in a ditch, but there is no, unlike the police, we don't classify our calls. So they will know what they're responding to, but they will respond in the same fashion to all of those calls. And that's the reality of how we operate. But so we don't have that data to say, well, actually, are we intentionally responding slower to certain incidents? But there is a expectation that the commander and the driver will make an assessment en route. But we do look at all those different responses, and all that information is available, and we do share it to our annual report. So the Fire and Rescue annual report, which is published every year, we're looking very soon to publish our next report, which covers 25-26. But all of those are available online, and you can see our response times against different areas in those reports.
Okay, thank you for that. Obviously, in terms of fire and rescue, the preservation of life is the key outcome in much of what it is that you're doing. But I'm also interested in the preservation of heritage, particularly because we're a very fortunate county in many respects to have some heritage assets of international significance. I wonder, to what extent do you factor in the importance of heritage assets in terms of your future plans and your response times?
Yeah, well, so thank you. Again, really key to us, and we recognise that not just Oxford, but Oxfordshire, it's got some, as you say, has got some internationally renowned heritage sites that we're here to protect. As part of the way we operate as a fire and rescue service, we have to do a community risk management plan, and we do that on a regular basis, covering about 4 or 5 years. We're currently coming to the end of our latest plan, which runs from 22 to 26, and within that we do an assessment of the risk in all of our areas to understand how we do that. And heritage risk is a key risk. So when we look at heritage risk, we look at how we manage that risk, not both, but through response, our operational response to that, how we make sure that we have the right fire protection supporting those buildings to make sure fires don't happen in the first place, and if they do, it can be limited, and also our prevention work, our training and understanding the operational risks. So how do we prevent the fires happening in the first place? How do we make sure that the building owners have got the right things in place, recognizing that's a lot more complicated with heritage risk? And then how do we make sure that our fire crews understand those buildings? So an example would be, we have regular conversations with Oxford University, with their fire safety team, making sure the crews in the city understand those risks. And we jointly work on exercising to make sure that when we have a fire in any of our heritage buildings, we understand, our fire crews understand how the building works and how the fire safety measures work in the building, so we can do our best to stop the fire. We are reviewing that. We're having a lot of conversations with the university partly as a result of the fire rescue cover model to understand those risks. And what we've recognised is we have created a strategic risk group between ourselves and the university to make sure that our understanding of what the highest risk buildings are aligned, and the way we work and the operation we train and do matches that. So it is a key risk for us as a fire and rescue service. We are here to protect our heritage. I've shared with many people the story when I visited Paris and saw Notre Dame, and the kind of feeling I had of dread that I didn't want to be in a situation where that would ever happen in Oxford. So again, it's very key on our agenda and how we protect our amazing heritage.
So if I could just add very quickly, it'd be very interesting to see more detail on that, about the heritage risk, in particular how it may be cross-references with other forms of risk. So we saw in Glasgow major fires caused from a vape shop, it seemed. Now I know of some centuries-old buildings in some towns in Oxfordshire that now house vape shops, and if they are the higher risk, it'd be interesting to see how they factor in to policy around protecting heritage buildings.
Yeah, thank you. Just to be specific, in the consultation there was talk of closing down Rewley Road and the Kidlington Fire Station, and that feeds directly into the risk around heritage buildings. So is the closure of Rewley Road and the Kidlington Fire Station still on the table?
So within the consultation, we talked about whether we would create a new fire station which would allow us to close Rewley Road and Kidlington. That is still one of the proposals we're looking at. Still looking at potential sites for a new site. There's, as hopefully we've articulated through the consultation, the options we have is to redevelop the current Rewley Road site. And have a smaller fire station within Oxford, because the size of Rewley Road currently is we can't use parts of the building for training because of the challenges of being in the city centre. So we've got a site which we're not using effectively. So we're looking at potentially to redevelop that. The other options we are considering is whether a larger site outside of the centre of Oxford, it would be more appropriate, and that's all the modelling we did around that to do that. So we are still looking at those options and trying to find the best option to take us forward. And if we look at that, we've been very clear on what the impacts may be for response times into the city. But we also need to understand that for a significant fire in the city, we are not looking at one fire engine dealing with it, looking at the resources. So it's about the weight of response and making sure we have, as I've said, risk information to understand the risks, crews that are fully trained and understand the specifics of certain risks we have and how we respond to that.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Yes, I mean, my questions were very much similar around that. So using all that information you've just given us, presumably the annual report's coming out soon, but also the next plan that goes from 26 onwards is also coming out soon. And I think it'd be really important to have things like response time breakdown between on-call and full-time crews around the various, so not just the district areas, but around where the fire stations are. So it's easier to see where they're, how the service is working. And yes, listed buildings and the preservation of them, presumably in your next plan, that will also identify listed buildings right across Oxfordshire, and the response time to those, as well as those within the city. So is that correct?
So yes, we very much look at the heritage across, and within, we've already done the work for the next plan. Now there is a discussion that is currently ongoing because of LGR and what that looks like for our next plan, and whether we want to write a plan that will take us, it will be a very short plan as going to LGR, whether we can adapt our current planning to make sure that we can then start afresh when we know where our kind of our new governance will be. But the reality is we will make sure we have, whatever we do, there'll be a comprehensive plan in place, which is what drives the work that we do. It comes from the council's cabinet kind of giving me the plan back and say my role as the chief fire officer is to deliver against that plan. Informing that plan, we do a very in-depth risk assessment across all the risks across Oxfordshire. Heritage is a big piece of that, and that will look at heritage across Oxfordshire. It recognises obviously the concentration of heritage sites we have within Oxford itself. It obviously recognises Blenheim Palace as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but we also recognise there is a number of other heritage buildings across the area, and how we manage those. And just for your reassurance, from a risk information point of view, there are kind of 3 levels that we look at. So it will be either, it may be we just need we look at generic risk assessment. So our firefighters will have, and that challenge of the crossover between vapes in a heritage building and how we'd operate is we have operation procedures connected to dealing with vape fires and lithium-ion battery fires. We have generic risk assessments and operation procedures in dealing with buildings of a heritage nature. But then we'll also layer on top of that, if it's a specific building where we know we need to have additional information, there'll be further plans. Blenheim Palace is a good example in a way, because we have what we call a tactical fire plan. So the highest level of planning we can have is that we will look at all the different scenarios with the potential fire in Blenheim Palace and how we would manage that. We'll make sure that our crews train regularly to understand how they do that. The example would be is if we have a big fire, the water supplies aren't great, but there's a big lake. So we train very regularly on how we will get water out of the lake and use that to manage a fire. All of those things will go on. So all of that is happening. We have to get the balance of, we can't have a tactical fire plan in place for every single heritage building, but we have the generic plans to support us with what we may face on every day. If there is significant risk, we'll have those plans in place. And that will include things like salvage plans. So actually, if we have a fire in the Ashmolean Museum, do we understand how we're going to manage not just putting the fire out, but also, although saving life is a key priority for us, we're also there to save property. We're also there to save those heritage assets as well as the building.
I've got 2 more speakers, Councillor Middleton and then Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, looking at the statistics and the reports that you've put forward, I'd say, I mean, as Councillor Fawcett said, you've done very well, I think, within the resources that you have. The response times obviously could always be better. I'm sure they could always be better, but I think, taken in comparison to other areas, I think we're not too far off. And I appreciate there's obviously increasing risks in terms of different types of risks, I think, as you've identified, with things like lithium batteries and also an increasing population. So as I'm assuming, it's looking like we're going into another consultation. I suppose my 2 questions are, the first one is, I mean, we've already raised the issue of the Rewley Road and Kidlington closures, and as a Kidlington councillor, one of those is very close to my heart. So my first question would be, you've said those aren't off the table and those are still going to be considered. Is that going to be another part of the proposal under the new consultation? So is that essentially going to rear its head again? And the second one is pretty straightforward question that you may not want to answer, but is the bottom line an issue that you simply don't have enough resources and funding? There is a resource and funding deficit, and that what you're trying to do, and I think you're doing very well with what's available, is putting a quart into a pint pot. You are doing your best with the resources you have, but you need more resources and you need more money.
If I take the second question first, if I may, I think the reality is that's the whole point of the fire and rescue cover model, is trying to work out how what we currently have is a very traditional cover model, which relies heavily on the on-call, and that is causing us daily challenges where our team have to really work to I guess, for want of a better analogy, to kind of deal with the symptoms of a model which isn't as effective as we need it to be. The whole conversation around the fire and rescue cover model is looking at how we can use those resources differently, so we have a better model which leaves less fixing once it's in place, and we're hoping that will allow us to do that. We'll reduce the costs associated with overtime, which will then give us more financial resource to develop and improve as we'd want to. Again, going back, would I like more funding? Do I think that we need to fund fire and rescue services more? Yes, I do, as a professional chief fire officer. As we've said through national channels, and I've said locally, yes, I would. We could definitely do with more funding, and that would allow us to make sure take different approaches in what we do. And that came through the consultation where we talked about the investment opportunities which would allow us to improve the service while maintaining resilience. And there's always going to be a challenge between, if we become more efficient, it impacts on our resilience. So we're taking things out of the system, which means we don't have the resilience when things go, we have those challenges on a daily basis. However, I'm positive around the new fire rescue cover model. If we can find the right solutions, we'll definitely be in a position where we can be a more effective fire rescue service by taking having a different model and different approach, including that capacity to do more prevention work and using our whole time resources better, so we can actually do some of that. What we have proven nationally as a fire and rescue service, and I think we should be proud of internationally, is our prevention work is showing that reduction in fires in people's homes, and we have seen that improvements in fire deaths, fire injuries, and fires in people's homes. And although that is not decreasing as sharply as it was, we're still in a really good position to be where we are. Going back to the first question around where we are with Ruddy Road and Kidlington, we are still looking at those opportunities around what it is we can do from the Ruddy Road site. We've got a large site with an aging facility where we can't use part of it. It's not efficient. It's in the centre of town, so from a point of view of it, it's a good site to have, and we're looking at how we can use that effectively. But the challenge and the balance will always be around response times and making sure we've got good response times into the most densely populated parts of Oxfordshire to make sure we can continue to provide that service. And that's why we're exploring all of those options. If we find a site which we think is suitable, and there are a number of kind of ongoing conversations, we are, depending on what the site is, we'd like to go back to consultation, because we want to show the modelling. We want to be, as I hope people will see that in the last consultation, we were very open and honest about all the data, what the impact would be on response times to different areas, so people have a really clear picture. We're not, we want to make sure that the public understand what we're doing. We want to make sure that you as councillors understand what we're trying to do and understand those choices and trade-offs in any new site, in allowing us to build a service which is going to deliver for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you for those answers. So really what we're talking about is with resilience is actually building up our on-call daytime officers. That's what we're lacking. That's what your graphs and things showed, to have the resilience and the ability to respond on times and so forth. It's not so much really, I mean, it is important about where fire stations are, obviously, and how you mentioned that the Ruddy Road one is failing in the respect of it's out of date and so forth, and not such a good state. So for me, it seems to me that one of the recommendations we perhaps make is that we again continue as a county to try and recruit on-call firefighters. I know there's been some advertising and things around, but I think the more we can do, even as perhaps as local councillors as well, to promote that job to people that might be able to take it on. It is difficult, of course, in times where people working full time, and whether they're, it works in with their particular type of work. But it is the fact that we do need more on-call firefighters during the daylight hours when you have the most amount of instances. But I wanted to ask also as well, about just further to Councillor Roberts' question about the LGR and things and the risk of that happening. So in your opinion, if we go to 2 or 3 unitary authorities and see the fire and rescue service divided up that way, what sort, I mean, is that risk you're going to have to look at? What sort of risk are you going to have to look at? And how do you think the excellent service that we really get at the moment, I think, in Oxfordshire, what's the resilience going to be if you have to see the service divided up 2 or 3 ways?
If I can come back to the first question, is to say on-call firefighters is definitely part of the solution to the model going forward. And just to give reassurances, I've already met with the local community or the local councillors in Ensham, with Councillor Levy was there as well, to talk about how we can work together to try and improve the on-call recruitment in those areas. We've done the same with Woodstock, and I've got a meeting scheduled in for Henley. So as a result of the decision not to close those fire stations, we wanted to be really clear on how we were going to move forward and make sure we can recruit more on-call firefighters. But as I say, it's only part of the solution. The other part is around how we use our whole-time resources more effectively during the day. Going to the question of LGR, the devolution white bill is very clear that where a mayor authority exists, that fire and rescue services as well as policing should go under the auspice of the mayor. So the wider, so there is no intention that fire and rescue service will be disaggregated. So if we see a 2 or 3 unitary model in Oxfordshire, then fire and rescue service would come out of local government and would operate as a standalone entity over whatever geography the LGR points towards. So we are going through these conversations. We're managing those. The example of Surrey is a good one because they are 12 months ahead of us. So they're a county council fire and rescue service. They know that their unitaries is going to be split to 2 unitaries. Therefore, the fire and rescue service there is already going through the process of becoming a combined fire and rescue authority. So Surrey fire and rescue service will still exist, but it will be separate to the unitaries within that area.
To interact if I could on that particular answer. So with what's happening in Surrey, does that mean that they're coming under the mayor rather than the local authorities?
No, because there's no mayor, so they will become a standalone fire and rescue authority. So if you look at across neighbours, in Berkshire is probably the obvious one because they went through that process decades ago. So they operate as a fire and rescue service across the county of Royal Berkshire, but they are managed by representatives from the 6 unitary councils. In Surrey, it will be the same, but through 2 unitary councils. In Oxfordshire, or depending on the geography of LGR, we'd have to work out what that means and how we operate. But the model of a combined fire and rescue authority exists in a large proportion of the UK already. So there is a model. We just need to. The challenge for us is the transition and the lack of clarity of what that will look like currently. It's certainly a risk, and we are doing a lot of work to try and mitigate that.
I think Councillor Baines is going to carry on this conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to press on that point about the specific challenge of essentially integrating parts of the Berkshire Fire and Rescue Authority and changing that or breaking that open. That might come with potentially 2 of the 3 LGR options. If you could answer that, and then I'll come back with a slightly different question, that would be great.
So I'm not entirely sure what the question was.
So if there's a 2, if we go with a 2 unitary authority or a 3 unitary authority option, the proposed Ridgeway Council will cover part of existing Oxfordshire and Berkshire. Therefore, to have a single fire authority which covers the whole new combined area would mean services covering West Berkshire would have to be taken out of Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Authority and then be moved into a new fire authority area. What additional complications does that create? What additional financial implications does that create? And is that unique in terms of any other area? Are there cases where existing fire authorities have been significantly altered in this way?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the clarity on the question. So we've been looking at this very closely, and I've been having discussions with my colleagues in Royal Berkshire. I've also been talking across Buckinghamshire as well. Because of that, the the intent with the deregulation bill that fire rescue would go under a mayoral authority. We don't know what a mayoral authority would look like. There is also conversations around strategic foundation authorities, which you'll be aware of, and understanding whether that would be able to host fire and rescue, and that's currently unclear. If we were to go ahead on a combined fire and rescue authority model, and we did have a Ridgeway Council, there would have to be a discussion around. My understanding is there aren't any situations where a fire and rescue service, two fire and rescue services operate across one unitary council, which I think is your point. So we'd have to look at what that means. There are some obvious solutions that spring to mind. One would be a combination between Oxfordshire and Royal Berkshire to cover that gap. So would you, if you're having to create a new organisation, would you create a combined fire and rescue authority across that geography? We also know there's the strategic spatial plans, which include Swindon, which the government's alluded to. So again, understanding what foundation authority looks like. The reality is we will find a way to manage the governance, whatever the final decisions are. There are options to do that, and we can make sure that we still continue to provide a fire rescue service to our communities. The challenges of what the governance is and what the transition costs are is something we are currently looking through and making sure we understand, and we are in regular conversations with our MHCLG colleagues managing fire, so they understand the challenges they may face. But there is a whole raft of different options that you've identified. We are doing the planning scenarios behind all of those options and understanding what the impact of those would be. But there, I think you've understand, there's a number of different moving parts of whether we would move up to a strategic authority of some level, or whether we'd have to become a broader geography for the fire rescue service.
And finally, Councillor Middleton.
Oh, sorry, I have a different question.
Finally.
Sorry, it's related to just looking forward. So, firstly, what if you could provide a bit more detail in terms of your ongoing conversations with the FBU in terms of mitigating the potential risk of future industrial action, given that that was not cited as a specific risk previously when the reorganisation was considered. And then the second point was related to the finance position going forward. We obviously have significant financial challenges in this authority in the next financial year, and I know budget discussions are already ongoing. What expectations in terms of has been made of your directorate in terms of what the ask's been for you to draw up potential options and plans in terms of budget savings?
So the conversation with FBU and industrial action, just to be really clear, we were very clear about the challenges around going through significant transformational change affecting terms and conditions, and the challenge we would have with the Fire Brigade Union. So we have, and it's on our kind of on risk registers around those challenges. So we did understand the challenge we would face. But the point I'd like to make is we are very fortunate to have representatives of the Fire Brigade Union, to have a workforce which is very, they understand the challenges they're facing. They're very, they're very good at what they do and understanding the challenge. And they're working really hard with us to try and find solutions we can take forward to avoid any industrial action, which is obviously the scenario we all want. We are, when we go through any significant change which is going to affect terms and conditions, there are challenges, but that's why we have the working groups. That's why we're working extremely hard to make sure that we can find a solution which is going to work for everyone, both in terms of what we need from the model and what people are willing to accept, or what people see as positive and negative, and trying to find those way forward. So again, I am just on the record. I think the Fire Brigade Union officials have been extremely good in having the right conversations and making sure that they are doing what they should for their members, but also recognising that they are there to support our communities as well as we are. And I've forgotten the second part of the question now. If you could remind me.
What's being asked of your directorate in terms of future budget planning for the upcoming financial year? Obviously, decisions have not been taken, but in terms of what's being asked to you to look at, consider, are there any targets in relation to savings that you're
That probably explains my amnesia. No, but in fairness, we are we are part of the budget discussions. We are looking at what savings we can make, as we always do. However, there is a recognition within that the impact of LGR is going to have on us as a service. So recognising that where you've seen County Council Fire and Rescue Services come out of the County Council, most recently in Northamptonshire and in Cumbria, it does create financial challenges for organisations. So I think there is a reflection on, yes, everybody has to make sure we're operating as efficiently as possible, but recognising that we are the pathway forward for us as a fire rescue service is different to other services in respect to LGR. I don't know if Ian would like to add to that.
Yes, obviously part of Rob's whole portfolio goes beyond just fire and rescue service. So he has some of the community safety services as well, which wouldn't be. Apologies. Yes, sorry. Ian Dyson, Director of Financial and Commercial Services. Apologies. So the requirements on all of us as directors as part of the looking at how savings can be achieved have been covered. Rob's been part of that as well. There's no specific targets been set on the fire and rescue service, but actually what we recognise is we need to have a look at the fire and rescue service as a whole, as part of the, as Rob has said there, as part of the LGR approach. And we're currently looking at what the financial envelope would be for the fire and rescue service if it was to exit the county council on the 1st of April 2028, and where all those costs are and what that potential burden or opportunity could be financially. And then we'll start looking at it in more detail around working with Rob on that. But there's no specific targets being set to the fire and rescue service for savings.
Councillor Middleton.
Thanks. Just a plea, really. You mentioned a list of towns, I think parishes, that you had meetings scheduled with. Bearing in mind your answer to my previous question that the closure of Killington Fire Station is still on the table, can you add Killington to that list, please?
Yeah, I certainly can. I mean, what we've been clear with, because of the nature of discussions around property, that even if a deal materialised tomorrow, it would still be a very long lead in time to any closure. We anticipate it between 5 and 7 years, and we've spoken to our teams about that to understand that. The challenge is making sure that we are, as the kind of property deals and plans progress, making sure we're part of those plans as early as possible, which is why we've started talking about it now. But I'm more than comfortable to come and speak to the parish council, give an update on where we are.
Council.
Sorry,
Town
council.
Thank you. And thank you, Chief Fire Officer, for taking all those questions. So the recommendations that I've noted are, we want more routine reporting on the fire and rescue service. The annual report is fine, but I think it needs to be an integral part of the business management and monitoring report. And I think listening to the conversations, there'll be an understanding of what KPIs the committee would like to see there, but we'll obviously leave it to you to bring those forward. I think we'd like to note our concern about the heritage buildings, accepting that they are throughout Oxfordshire, not just in the city, but it's to do with response times. And although you say that the issue around Rewley Road is the lack of training facilities, well, you can train anywhere. The issue is where the fire engines are going to be. And the third issue I picked up from Councillor Smith is we need a better understanding of the proactive recruitment for on-call and full-time firefighters. I know there are very colourful pictures outside fire stations encouraging people to respond, but I think we need a better understanding of how proactive we're being as a county council in getting the staff that you need. So members of the committee, are there any other recommendations that you'd like to make? Councillor Baines.
So yeah, just a minor point on your second recommendation there in relation to the heritage buildings, just to specifically add a mention of the modelling in relation to response times, ensuring that the heritage aspect is embedded in that. the risk management in relation to response times. And then the other point I was going to make was about the sort of LGR point theme that's been raised about the need to ensure that the potential additional costs to future authorities, the public, in relation to the creation of a separate fire authority, are put into the sort of public domain, and there's a lot more transparency with existing members in terms of what those costs are, looking at as it, you know, these conversations are obviously ongoing, but I think it's obviously something we need to be very clear about.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
I mean, the next plan is going to be coming soon, so that's 26 to 31. Is it possible to get to see the draft earlier than normal so that we could got input into that and make sure that we're happy with that before it gets to be final? You know, it's very frustrating for a scrutiny committee to have the final report coming without having had any input to how it's been achieved. So whether that could come at a slightly earlier phase than perhaps normal.
Are you talking about the annual report?
The next plan for the next 5-year plan, which is separate from the annual report, I think.
Yeah, if I come back on that, that is correct.
Please.
Yeah, we're talking about the community risk management plan. We are currently having discussions on whether we do start a new plan in 2027, which is on their own end, or whether we will extend the current plan, and that's linked to LGR. So we have decisions being made, and once we have a kind of come July and we have more clarity on where we're going, we will make a decision on what we're doing. My feeling is we'll end up extending the current plan, but what would be helpful, I think, and hopefully for me and hopefully for you, would be that if we do extend the current plan, we make sure that the kind of process on how we do that and the amendments and updates to the current plan, you have sight of that in this committee to scrutinise how we're doing that, because it's equally important that if we extend the current plan, we're doing that correctly. So I think that'd be useful. If we do end up having to do a new plan, we'll obviously take on board that bringing it to this committee at the earliest stage would be helpful.
Thank you. And I'm happy to add that to the list of recommendations. Just to make the point that the place overview and scrutiny committee are looking at the cover model in particular at the September meeting. So we'll be able to explain it all again. So just to thank you again, Chief Fire Officer, and Councillor Fawcett would like to wrap up this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I just put on record my thanks to the Chief Officer and the team for the enormous amount of work they do, a lot of which goes unseen, particularly the excellent preventative work, which results in there being far fewer domestic fires, in particular in Oxfordshire, than we would otherwise see. I think it's been a very interesting discussion and some very useful points. Ultimately, obviously, it's for scrutiny committees to decide their agendas. From my perspective, I would welcome a discussion at the relevant scrutiny committee at an earlier stage so that people can feed in to future plans. On the point about the sort of preparations for LGR, I think we have to strike a balance between doing the early prep now so that we're ready for what the potential outcomes might be for LGR, but at the same time not spend a huge amount of time at this point doing detailed work on several options, most of which will then be wasted effort because we find out they're not going to happen. So we're trying to strike that balance. I think realistically, we're not going to have a lot of detail before the announcement, and it would be wrong for our officers to spend a lot of time on it before that announcement. But I'm very happy to share, what we do have with with relevant councillors, if that's helpful. But thank you very much. Really useful debate from my point of view.
Thank you, Councillor Fawcett. And finally, Councillor Baines.
Yeah, sorry, just for clarification, Councillor Fawcett, I don't think anyone's asking for anything more than that, and I think everyone understands the context in which we're operating, given the fact, but also an understanding that the timescales, for example, that this committee works means that often recommendations and things come back in 3 or 6 months or whatever in terms of the responses and that sort of thing. So by then, hopefully, we'll have more clarity in terms of what comes next.
Yeah, thanks. That's helpful.
So thank you again, Chief Fire Officer. And we'll move on to I think we've been through the recommendations, and we move on to agenda item 6. This is the Oxfordshire County Council Commercial Strategy Update, and the paper is going to be introduced by Councillor Dan Levy.
Thank you. I'm Dan Levy. I'm the Cabinet Member for Finance and Property. One of the key things I've been very keen on since I came into office has been to make the commercial activity of the council something that adds value to what we're doing rather than what it was to a large extent before, something that actually acts as a drag on it. Hence, we've got the new commercial strategy, which this committee has already interrogated and which was approved in March 24, and the new procurement policy, which was introduced recently. So we moved from a focus on compliance with procurement rules being the primary focus of activity to one in which commercial activity is a key part of our wider efforts. And I think there's 3 main areas I'd like to highlight. Number one, making sure that our existing and new contracts deliver financial and social value and that contractors actually stick to them. Number 2, supporting our community and environmental activity via the new procurement strategy and developing an inclusive local economy and enhancing public services through our responsible commercial activities. And then thirdly, finding commercial activities which, among other things, bring money into the authority, which we can then use to deliver services. So this is very cliche, but this really is a journey which I think for as long as this council exists and probably beyond it, we're all taking. But I think we have made huge strides, and this is really an opportunity for you to check that that is the case, and that we are really doing what we said we would do. I think Ian, you probably want to pick up the detailed stuff and may have some words to say before we get into it. Thank you.
So I'll introduce myself properly this time. So I'm Ian Dyson, Director of Financial and Commercial Services. Yes, just building on what Councillor Levy has said. In the 2 years since we've had the strategy, I think we've made reasonable progress. There's some really positive things that have been achieved. It's been slower than perhaps I'd have hoped, but I think, as I said to this committee before, there was a lot of foundational work that we needed to undertake, and actually getting the operating model correct in the organisation is really been the main essence of the work that we've done since. And that's included some organisational redesign in terms of my service and the structure that service now has. I would have loved to have been accompanied today by my head of commercial and procurement, Richard Scarlett, Dr. Richard Scarlett, who but he's on leave. We do allow him to take leave, and a much deserved leave. And he has made a fundamental difference in terms of driving the team, the operating model that we're now seeing come to fruition. Obviously, there have been some big successes. So the recent acquisition of the Castle Quarter, in terms of that was seeing us acquire a property that meets our place strategy, meets our opportunity for developing our asset base, which also then turns into a strong commercial case for driving income generation as well, is the direction that we want to go in. We're seeing other opportunities that we're working on now around income generation through developing our own frameworks, for example, that will not only improve our procurement process, the speed at which we can procure, but also potentially drive income as well from others using our frameworks. So a huge amount of work has been done on the foundational side. I've said reasonable progress. You will note in the table on the actions that there are still some that are in amber because they're in progress, but we're making good progress with those. The structure of the team now is right. We're strengthening our approach now to how we're doing our contract management and across the organisation. There's more work to do around the development of the contract managers, and we're doing work on our training materials there. But we are really focusing now on our platinum contracts and the developing those relationships with our platinum providers as well, and it's beginning to come to fruition and have some real impacts.
Thank you. Can I start by looking at paragraph 6, which talks about the Castle Quarter. The majority of members were unaware of this particular initiative because of commercial incompetence. So, for example, I don't know how much money we actually spent on it. I know the figure of the net surplus is in here, but I don't know how much we spent, and I don't know where we got the money from. And the question is the consistency of decision making, in so much as this building has been sold, whereas we're buying a lease for the building literally next door. So if you could just explain the rationale behind that decision, please.
So the rationale was that the opportunity for the lease came up for the property next door. We looked at it from a place perspective and what it brings, how significantly important it is to the place shaping of Oxford, and then the wider benefits for Oxfordshire, and then look to see what it would cost to acquire that asset and how we can cover the costs. Does it make a good commercial proposition for purchasing it? So the total capital investment that we've agreed with Cabinet is for 34 million for which covers the acquisition and also the capital needs. The net surplus of the revenue that it's going to generate, covering the costs of borrowing, covering the operating costs. Those operating costs will be operating on a commercial basis as well. Leaves us with a minimum of 550,000. So it's 550,000 that we're building into the budget as being our improvement, and then we would expect to see that through commercial review of the operations. We would expect to see that increase. So we can see the significant potential of the site as well to develop, which has been limited in terms of its the investment time that's been put into it by the previous owners.
Can I ask what the risks are in that deal?
Yeah, so the income is predicated on for a lot of the activity. So so it's a turnover based income. So clearly, if the turnover is low, there is a risk to the level of income that will come through. But the due diligence has looked at the thresholds of that. We've done some significant due diligence, and we are satisfied that the levels are obtainable, manageable. There will be a small buffer that we will create in terms of some excess that we're expecting to make in year 1, year 2. So we've just put a buffer in there for a reserve, just in case those numbers actually drop. But we've got market advice from Savills, our advisors as well, that would suggest that there is no issue here, and the asset itself is expected to rise in value as well.
Thank you, Councillor Middleton and Councillor Baines.
Thanks. Actually, your last point there, saying you thought the asset was likely to rise in value. I think the reason we bought it is because it's dropped dramatically in value since it was previous. So I'd be interested to know what you're basing that assumption on. I mean, I would, agree maybe it's reached a plateau. It's dropped as far as it's going to drop, and it may not drop anymore. But I think it's kind of anybody in commercial property that says it's going to rise in value in the current market would be, frankly, flying a bit of a kite. In terms of the 550 net surplus, as you say, that's based on servicing the debt for buying the property in the first place. Is it a buy? Is it? I mean, you can come back on this. Is it purchase of freehold or is it lease? You mentioned lease. But as you say, the surplus is based on, and I mean, in terms of 34,550,000 is a pretty slim surplus. You said that's the risk is based on footfall, which is I find it's a bit of an odd description. It's based on the rent that we're going to get back from the tenants. There are still some empty properties, although I believe there are plans to occupy those. But that's the big risk, isn't it? And I mean, I've been critical of another council that purchased another property with a word castle in it, and that they came unstuck pretty spectacularly in terms of their assumptions about future letting profiles. So I think there needs to be a little bit more focus on that aspect, in that if some of those operators turn up their toes, or we don't get the occupancy that is predicted, it is quite a risky strategy, isn't it?
So in terms of the value, we believe the value of it has plateaued, so it was a good time to be purchasing. Our advice from again from our property advisors from Savills is that they expect that market to have an upturn in the next few years. But it's the fact that it's plateaued, so we've got it at a low price. The purchase price in 2016 was £42 million. We already hold the freehold over the land. So it's the leasehold that we've actually purchased. So we have the whole package now. Yes, there is a risk, but that risk is around then what structure you put in to manage it. And so we've taken a very commercial approach to our management of that. So we have acquired an asset manager to oversee that. We have property management in place as well. So we're not managing that internally. And the site and the opportunity, there is scope for doing different things with each of the units that will be in demand, again from our advisors, that there will be strong demand for those sites should we need them. Those 4 units are empty at the moment, but there are agreements in place that we've inherited for them to be filled, and we expect them to be occupied within the next 18 months. In the deal that's been done, we are protected in terms of the income for those for the next 2 years for those units.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but advisors always advise. Property advisors always tend to be the most optimistic people I've ever met. And I would say they would say that, wouldn't they? And I've kind of heard that before, and I think that was exactly the situation that another council was in when they were advised this is all going to go great. Or maybe it will. I mean, I'm not going to prejudge it. The other question is, you said we had the freehold and we bought the leasehold. Can you just give a bit more detail on that, because it's a little bit confusing?
So we've held the freehold for I don't know when we owned the freehold from, but a long time ago. The decision to sell the leasehold was made several years ago. I can't remember the exact date, but decades ago again for that. And that was part of the overall deal that was made for the development of the Castle Quarter at the time, along with the Westgate side as well. So we gave up the leasehold at that time.
So as the head landlord, essentially, were we not receiving some income as a result of that anyway?
Yes, we were, and it's not even worth mentioning the size of that So for the opportunity of the asset, the level of income that we were getting as the head lease owner was negligible.
So essentially, it was a peppercorn rent coming back to us from another operator who was then leasing to other operators, and then so we bought that option back essentially. Okay.
Councillor Levy.
Yeah, thanks. When this opportunity arose, I was as cynical as you would have expected me to be, Councillor Middleton. I mean, the due diligence was very real due diligence. I think the thing to note, though, is the scale of this is much lower than the other council you mentioned, and therefore the potential downside is much lower. In terms of the scale of this council, there are sitting tenants within the site who are doing very well, and that was clearly part of the consideration about looking at the risk. And there's always going to be some downside risk in any scheme, otherwise you'd never be able to make any money out of anything. But the upside is much higher than the downside, and the downside is very limited. But I started off from exactly the same level of skepticism that you showed. If I could just pick up the placemaking stuff. Councillor Phillips, you mentioned, why are we selling County Hall at the same time as acquiring an interest in something next door to County Hall? Well, this place is also going to be part of that placemaking improvement. So with a nice hotel here when we move out, or soon after we move out, and the improvements we expect to make within the Castle Quarter, the whole area will be improved, as indeed, of course, will the area around Speedwell, where our new headquarters will be. So I think it does all fit together, even if it, I acknowledge, looks slightly strange in terms of timing.
Councillor Baines.
I'll just pick up with just what you said just there. In the sense, the curious nature of the timing. So by that, do you admit that given the fact that this purchasing decision was made on the basis of advice from Savills, in the same way the decision to sell County Hall was made by Savills, that actually there is, maybe you did get it wrong in the sense that maybe a lease option here as purchasing the ability to own the leases for the Castle Quarter would have been a better option. And did you get that judgment wrong in retrospect?
No, I think it all fits together very well, actually. This place becoming a hotel and the county council receiving a large capital receipt, more than enough to pay for Speedwell, is a good thing. Moving to Speedwell is a good thing, and having a commercial interest in Castle Quarter is a good thing. So no, I don't agree at all that we got it wrong. And in terms of Savills, yes, we get advice from Savills, but we interrogate that advice. We don't just do exactly what they say. And believe you me, we did very much interrogate their advice.
I just think that there's quite a big disjuncture there to have very very contrasting advice with a very similar, almost literally the same location. The fact that less than a year beforehand, it was saying that the best thing is to sell this property, County Hall, rather than to lease it and have a kind of retained income, and then to later say that actually poor decision making meant that we next door we forego that income, and actually the chance to have that retained income is really important. I don't see how those things mirror up, but I'll move on to different questions I have, if I may. So in the commercial strategy, I think one of the key questions I always have in relation to this, and this came up when the original strategy came to this committee before, is what is the understanding of commercial in this sense, especially considering the factors like what are we considering when we take these commercial considerations, and are we thinking about the true costs of whatever decision we're making? Traditionally, when often thinking things commercially, people assume that that means a very purely cost driven and driving down costs. But obviously we're aware of things like scope 3 emissions when it comes to the environment, but also social costs. If we pay people less and there's less money going around the local economy, they have impacts on their well-being and their life, etc. How are we striking that balance when we come to defining the commercial thinking that we're undertaking?
Value for money is the key driver through our commercial considerations, and value for money in that is about how we're impacting and what outcomes are we trying to drive and what are we trying to achieve on there. You would have heard from our revised social value policy, the procurement strategy, that we are looking at how we can increase the use of SMEs, and looking at how social value will drive importance through our process, looking at social and economic and impacts in what we're doing. So it significantly drives. So this is not about how do we maximise or reduce the cost to the authority at all costs. It's measuring and looking at all of the policies and outcomes that the council is trying to achieve, but it's how we're achieving the best value for through that process by being more commercial in our outlook and looking at things in the way we're assessing things and the way we're evaluating the using the data, the driving, looking at them once we've got those contracts in place. We're actually measuring those and making sure that they are delivering on what they promised to deliver.
So applying that, because I'm still slightly confused when we talk about this. So when it comes to LGR, which is referenced in the report, what does more commercial thinking when it comes to LGR and the options that come available through that, what does that mean? And, how do we ensure that we're getting the advantages and we're not necessarily overlooking some of the risks and challenges and implications that might have for residents, staff, etc.?
If I can refer you to what Councillor Fawcett said earlier, we can't really predict what the government's going to tell us. I think there will be opportunities that come along through LGR. A fairly obvious one is that a unitary authority will have planning, fairly large land ownership, housing responsibilities under the same roof. So there can be some joined up thinking. But again, until we know what the authorities are and how they're going to set up, it's difficult.
Sorry, if I may provide just a bit more context in terms of the sort of answer that I'm looking for, is less to do with the structures in terms of the fact that we have bringing powers together, which almost certainly is beneficial, but it's more we're creating a new authority or new authorities from scratch. And indeed, if this commercial strategy is to lead into that new councils, it'll probably have an impact on what comes forward. And is it likely, because of this commercial strategy, that this commercial strategy moves those new councils closer to, for example, a Wiltshire council model, whereby when they undergo reorganisation, it was an in-house first strategy where they tried to in-house as many services as possible, or alternatively something more akin to Barnet Council, where almost everything was outsourced where possible? Obviously, that's potentially only one element of discussions around being commercially driven, but these sorts of things are important. I'd be interested to know what's the interpretation.
We can't bind the future councils, can we? I mean, there are clearly discussions. Well, there's a lot of work going on between all of the councils, particularly at senior officer level, to plan for the future. But absolutely, I can't even say if there's one unitary that it will carry on doing the same policy as this council, because it will not be Oxfordshire County Council. It would be a new Oxfordshire Council with a different strategy. However, I think what we're doing here, and I think what the districts are doing and the city are doing as well, is it's all moving in similar directions to try and build together a commercial strategy which is both financially sensible and delivering social value. And I would be enormously disappointed if the 1, 2 or 3 successor councils didn't want to do very similar things, but we can't bind them, and it would be entirely wrong even to try to.
Just to say, by borrowing 34 million, you're already binding a future council. Councillor Evans.
Great, thank you very much. I had a question on the Castle Quarter building on that point. Of this £34 million, we're looking at a net annual return of the 550,000 that equates to about 1.6%. Is that something that the council will consider a good yield on £34 million that's being invested? And I wonder how open-ended is this policy? Isn't now the county council's view that it should snap up almost any commercial property in the county where it thinks that it can make a return? Is it limited to Oxford? Should all of us begin nominating commercial assets in our division that we think the council could sensibly buy? And I wonder what scrutiny councillors can expect about decisions where the council can spend tens of millions of pounds and make itself a very significant commercial landlord in the county.
So we're not allowed to borrow money in order to just for commercial gain. So the council is not permitted to do that. The rules do not allow us to do that. We have to do it so as there is a wider benefit to the residents of Oxfordshire and a purpose for doing it. So the place shaping, the development of place here was the driving force for it. What we needed to make sure was that if it's going to require a significant investment, then it is actually going to pay for itself, because we can't just borrow £34 million with then the cost of borrowing on top of that becoming a burden into the revenue budget. So therefore the business case is around the opportunity that acquisition brings in terms of place, and then the opportunity to be able to purchase it becomes how do we finance this, and is there an opportunity through the financing to in this instance to generate a surplus.
If I may, then I accept your point about place shaping, but then it just strikes me on the face of it as being quite curious that the investment would go into the most commercially attractive bit of the county altogether. You know, there are other parts of the county where place shaping would be a bigger priority for commercial investment. And do you not concern that what may have happened here, in fact, is that the council may have squeezed out other investment that could come into Oxford as a relatively attractive place to invest in order to try and just bring some return for itself?
No, I don't think so. So the development of Oxford itself is quite significant that's coming on. We're looking forward to there being lots of investment coming into to Oxford and across Oxfordshire wider. I think what this does is that demonstrates the council's strategic ambition for place, and it includes our intent then to actually be part of that solution as an integral partner into the wider development of the city and the county as a whole. So I don't think it will stifle alternative investment. I think actually it'll show intent and help stimulate that wider investment.
And if I could add to that, the fact that Reef Hotels are acquired this place and are investing heavily in turning it into a brilliant hotel demonstrates exactly the opposite. There really genuinely is external investment that wants to come into Oxfordshire. And just picking up on Ian's point, we absolutely are not allowed to invest in things just for a financial return, primarily because the previous government, in fact, stopped that happening because of the disasters of some other authorities, including the one that Councillor Middleton alluded to.
Can I just ask a question on a different theme, if that's...
Yeah, please do.
Good. I just wanted to touch upon some of the efficiencies that are mentioned in this report, in particular under paragraph 8D and around resourcefulness. It's good to see that there is a plan for continuous improvement and improved efficacy and efficiency. And it talks there about an internal AI agent and reducing the administrative demand on the team. But when I look at the financial implications in this report, it seems that the savings so far have focused on third-party spend and contracts. Do we not also see, or would we not expect to see, those internal savings as well, as opposed to just third-party and external costs, which would either mean that people could be reallocated to other priorities or frontline services, or that some of the backroom costs might be reduced? Are we not seeing that as well? And is that captured anywhere in this report?
So it's like part of last year's budget process, we saw some investment in my team, primarily to strengthen on the contract management side of activity. But as part of that continuous review, as we look to utilise more and more technologies for solving that, then of course we will always look upon any natural attrition, natural turnover as opportunities for how we can reduce the size of the number of people working in this activity, and using technology as much as we possibly can to streamline the processes and that to achieve the same objectives. We can see there are some great opportunities on being able to do that as more innovative tools are becoming available on the market or being developed all the time. And I know that Richard, the head of service, is very much at the forefront of thinking of some of those things. So yes, it's not included in the financial implications here because it's not developed in terms of a budget strategy, but absolutely it is in our thinking that that's what we should be doing. Yes.
So just very briefly then on a point of clarity. So the efficiencies that we've seen so far have seen the number of council employees increase who are working in this. Is that where we're at the moment?
So as part of the budget last year, yes, we asked for an investment in order to set the team up for the operating model. That operating model was always to be designed to get the foundations right, to set us up on the right foothold, to get everything in place that we need to. And as we then move that forward, we should be able to shrink again as those processes and are adopted and in place. Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
I've just got two questions. One refers to one of the key principles, which was collaboration. And I'm pretty certain that is probably happening because of LGR as much as anything else. But it doesn't seem to be reported on in the report. So I was wondering how that's going, but also rather sad about, because I'm data driven, the dashboard delay, and how long is that delay going on for? Are we going to be able to get that dashboard up? Because that's obviously key behind delivering a large number of your KPIs.
So I agree, the dashboard is disappointing. I don't have a firm timeline on it at the moment, but I will be having that in the next few weeks in terms of a firm timeline on it. It will be in this financial year, but I don't have an exact date on it, so we'll have to come back on that. But that bit is disappointing. But there's lots of work we're doing in that space. So it's in the we're now able to put it into the first part of the development, but I don't have a timeline to give you. In terms of the collaboration, so collaboration across the organisation now is significant. So the operating model has landed. So we're working much closer now through our business partnering approach with all of our services, and we also through LGR as well are collaborating strongly with all of the other local authorities. There's key work streams of activity that's going on in there. Just as a demonstration of collaboration, that the council is up for an award for the care home framework project that was started developing in 2024, and that was a strong collaboration between the procurement activity and the adult social care team as well. So we're very hopeful of being award winning in that. It's recognised as a really good practice approach that we put in place. So collaboration. My team is also we are strongly collaborating with all of the services in terms of their budget proposals and savings targets and the like as well, in terms of how we're driving those efficiencies.
I just wanted to pick up, it does say in that collaboration also with our district partners.
Yes.
And I wondered, a lot of the report deals with the collaboration with other areas, but it doesn't mention the district partners collaboration. Has that brought up good practice sharing?
So it's really been enabled through the LGR discussions. which are kind of also tied in with Richard's appointment as well. And so there are regular conversations going on with all the districts in the city, and in particular looking at all the contracts that we're holding, looking at our future procurements that are coming up over the next 2 years before vesting, and looking at where those opportunities could be around future procurement activity. So I think we're in a strong place with that.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I mean, that last comment's good to hear, that we're in a strong place. But could I ask a bit more? I mean, Councillor Roberts was asking the questions too a little bit, I think, about managing our existing. Richard was a really good appointment, I have to say, for this council. But what about managing our existing contracts? I mean, can you give an example of where, you know, management of a contract has been really beneficially financially to this council?
So a specific example of where we're managing a contract better, or we're getting into it.
Yeah. Just as an example of one that we're managing really well now, that is actually proving to be financially advantageous for us.
So our focus has been on where we're assessing against our contract management framework, which we've developed. We're assessing our platinum contracts as to where they are in terms of measuring against that framework, and then we're putting in actions to measure those. But we're doing more direct work on some of those platinum contracts as well, where they maybe are having some impact on the organisation at the moment. So we're working really well with the M Group contract. Yeah, the M Group contract and we're doing work around the System C, which is the adults and children social care line of business systems. We're developing those relationships and building on those and doing those assessments.
Thank you. Sorry to get, I'm not going to be sorry about going back to the council quarter. Where did you get the 34 million from if we're not allowed to borrow it?
We are allowed to borrow it.
Oh.
If it was just there's a great commercial opportunity here, we want to buy a commercial outlet, we're not able to do that. But you can borrow the place shaping side of it enables us to do the borrowing.
Semantics at its best there. Councillor Middleton.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that before as well. The other place that I'm not going to mention initially defined it as you have in this here, an investment that had a return, and then it was only after several years of opprobrium, probably mostly from me, that it was then redefined as a place shaping regeneration, which then went into a different pot. And then that couldn't, we couldn't criticise it for it being a really, really poor investment. Appreciate you're approaching it from that position now, but the question that rises, and it's the same question that I asked in the other place, is what makes us think we're any better at managing it than the commercial operators were? If we're saying we're taking this on as a place shaping regeneration project, what's the plan? And I think it's notable that in this report, and probably one of the things that's generated the most questions is one paragraph where you've got a £34 million investment that you're framing as a regeneration project with no detail on what you're proposing to do, what you can do that's any different to a commercial operator. We don't have any details of the letting profiles, so we don't know what the income is at the moment, what the proposed income will be on the new lettings that you're going to be talking about, and why those are any more advantageous than we would get from a commercial operator, and what the risks are with the existing tenants. And I know some of them are, as you said, are very. I mean, obviously the hotel is very, very well established and very well funded, and I can appreciate that's probably a fairly nailed on tenant, but again, there must be a risk profile, and you've done your due diligence. So, as we are the Performance and Corporate Scrutiny Committee, one would expect a much more detailed report into all that information, bearing in mind that the investment we're talking about. And the other thing that I'd like to know, and then this is not really anything necessarily to do with this council, but why did we end up in a situation where we've got a significant piece of property and we were letting it to a commercial operator for hardly anything at all? I don't understand why we were in that position in the first place. If we were letting it to an operator who was then letting it to make a profit. I mean, as I say, I appreciate it wasn't a decision that was taken by this administration or possibly even the previous one, but it would be useful to know why we were in that position. And I've got a couple of other questions on the other bits, but obviously those are the first ones.
The why I can't comment on, although I've worked with this organisation for decades. I wasn't involved in that in that at the time that it was done. I can't. So I can't comment on that. We haven't gone back to investigate the why in this. We just saw the opportunity going forward. The purpose of this report was not specifically to go into details around the Castle Quarter. The purpose of this report was to give an update on the commercial strategy of which the Castle Quarter is an example of how a more commercial approach has led us into commercial thinking has led us into considering that opportunity. Some of the information you were talking about there is clearly commercially sensitive, as you would expect, but that doesn't mean to say it can't come back to this committee or to be considered and perhaps confidential papers. But the due diligence was thorough in this, and in terms of your question about what makes us believe we can do better on that. Well, as I said, we've gone into the market to acquire some asset management and property management expertise in this to support as part of the operational expenditure. We believe that with the drive of the county council looking at it, we can do better than what the previous commercial owners have done with that space. And
so, with respect, then you're saying that just because we're employing people that any commercial operator could have employed, we don't actually have a vision of our own.
No, I'm not saying that. We do have a vision for that. So this fits into the wider place strategy. And
we get to know what that vision is
through the place planning, place strategy for Oxford City and wider. Yes. In terms of the business plan, so part of the first thing we'll be then doing is developing that detailed business plan for the operation of the Castle Quarter, which is what we're doing now. We're developing that business plan for it. But what we've inherited is a going concern. Okay, so there's already things in plan. What we're doing is developing now that plan of how we enhance the place more.
And it's the plan I'm asking about.
Yeah,
but you're saying the plan is we've employed some external consultants who will write the plan for us, who any commercial operator could have employed.
That's part of the operating model, but the fact is this is generating revenue for us as well as being a material asset for the county council to own.
But that isn't the principal reason you said.
No,
the principal reason is a vision that we've got for placemaking. So what is that vision? That's what I'm asking.
So as you see the development of the Oxford West End coming up from the train station and the future developments that are being considered in that area, this is effectively a gateway into the city. This is a marked area that actually takes us into the city centre, up into the West Gate, up into the areas. So it is of strategic importance actually to that development. So that is a site that really sets the tone as you come into the entrance into this marvellous city.
Why did that escape the previous operators then?
I don't know. You have to ask those why it escaped them. But I don't know.
Thank you.
Maybe the scale of it wasn't sufficient for them in terms of their international operations.
Right, I'm going to move on to the recommendations that I've noted, but obviously happy to take more. I think we need to have a recommendation around the tension between transparency, which has been lacking in this particular transaction, and the need for commercial in confidence. And if as a county council we're going to be doing more of this, then you're going to have a discussion about how you involve members or not in these discussions, because this particular horse has bolted, and we're now retrospectively scrutinising this decision. And the reason we're spending time on it is because the actual papers are very vague and very high-minded in process. And what we have in front of us is an actual example of how you are implementing your strategy, which is why we spend time on it. So the first one is about, like I said, the tension between transparency and commercial in confidence. Picking up from Councillor Roberts's point, I think we want more explicit information about your work with the district councils. LGR is not an excuse not to do anything. It's not the only issue that we should be, holding things back, because the districts have got responsibility for economic development, and we need to be working with them, and we need to be explicit about it. And the issue about the dashboard, I think we'd like to make the recommendation. We'd like that to be brought forward. And I think that if we come back to this again, given that we've spent a lot of time on one example, again, picking up on Councillor Smith's point, we need more examples of how implementing this strategy has improved the quality of the contracts within the council. Anybody, any other members of the committee want to suggest any recommendations to Cabinet? Or have I got them all? Councillor Baines.
I suppose it would just be to have greater clarity on the interpretation of the commercial strategy and how it impacts meetings and decisions that are made by officers or cabinet members from this authority as part of the LGR process, just to give greater meat in the bone in terms of what the ongoing implementation of this more commercialised approach means for that process, noting that we won't have complete control, but obviously will be part of that conversation.
Thank you. I'm sure Mr. Hudson's got that one. Councillor Middleton.
I don't know whether we covered it, but it would be useful, I think, to have all that information that I said about the vision, the letting profiles, even if that has to be under, a confidential section. And I don't know. I know these things are kind of tied up in the Constitution, but given the magnitude of this investment, whether it's an investment for regeneration purposes or, I mean, as you said, it can't be a commercial investment. Is it possible in future for these things to be scrutinised by either this committee or I don't know whether it's gone through place? But both, I think, really, so that we can have input into it earlier on than just be looking at it after it's happened.
So there's something there about the governance arrangements for these multi-million pound decisions. Right. So if committee have got no more proposed recommendations, I'd just like to thank you both for coming to the meeting and for answering all the questions from the committee. So thank you. So moving on to agenda item 7, which is the shaping of Oxfordshire's future economy. I wasn't too sure what order these agenda items should be in, because sort of one feeds into the other, really. So I've got Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, she'll be back.
She will. She always
She's
does.
had to do a
break
with the child.
So I'll ask Robin Rogers if he could introduce the paper, please. Are you there, Robin? Say it again. Oh, right, okay. So welcome, Nick Glover. If you could introduce yourself, please. And I gather you've got the task of introducing this paper to the committee. Thank you.
I have, Chair. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for putting us on the agenda today. So by way of introduction, Nick Glover, Head of Future Economy at the County Council. I should also declare an interest, Chair, as I'm also the Interim Managing Director of Enterprise Oxfordshire, and there is an appendix in the pack there that touches on Enterprise Oxfordshire in all of this. I prepared a few slides because I'm very conscious that we've given you a lot of papers to work through, so I'm going to just set out a few slides, if that's all right, that might help contextualize some of this, and then hopefully allows plenty of time for you to ask us any questions. So you bear with me while I boot it up. Hopefully that's visible on the screen. Excuse me. Right, if we start at the top. So yeah, thank you for inviting us to talk today. I'm just going to sort of contextualize this, give a brief introduction, a sort of a snapshot, a very high level summary of what the work to date has told us about Oxfordshire's economy. We'll drill into some of the core challenges that we've identified in a little more detail, and then I'll start talking about what the shape of the response is likely to be as we move into the decision making kind of period over the coming weeks and months. So we're going to talk a fair bit this morning and this afternoon about productivity. The reason for that, apologies if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but the reason for that is that it's the key economic determinant of people's material standard of living, and our ability to kind of raise that standard of living is almost entirely dependent, per Mr. Krugman here, on our ability to raise output per worker. And when we look at the Oxfordshire economy, the sort of the top left there says that productivity in Oxfordshire in the round is good. It could be better. It lags behind Berkshire in particular. There is some devil in the detail here because Berkshire has some massively productive assets in terms of things like Heathrow and a real glut of data centres, which certainly skew the picture there. It's the one on the right which I think is particularly interesting here, and you'll see that kind of dense green, dark green bar towards the bottom. That's our output per worker. That is lower than it could and should be, and it's lower than some of our kind of very near neighbours. And what that kind of means when we sort of drill down into our lower super output areas there, you can see the kind of the lilac areas are where we're getting into areas that feature in the top 2 deciles of the indices of multiple deprivation. So they're the areas where we have kind of more entrenched poverty and inequality. We're not the only ones across the county, but there's some of the most prominent areas there around Banbury and Cowley. So this is a real pressing issue for our residents in this place, that we have to think deeply about what we're going to do to raise productivity, and in doing so raise people's standard of living. So that's the context in which we've been trying to do some of this work. So what do we know about the Oxfordshire economy? We know we punch well above our weight in the round. That top left chart kind of bears that out. We have a sort of £28 billion economy, and that's underpinned by our globally significant research and innovation assets. We have some exceptional hero brands in this place, many of which, my background is sort of in Birmingham in the West Midlands, and I can say with a good degree of confidence that any one of these assets, Birmingham will write its entire economic strategy based around. We've got a real plethora of some of these things, whether that's the university, whether that's places like Harwell, whether it's the Cotswolds and things like Blenheim Palace. We have such a rich concentration of hero brands and significant assets. That's given rise clearly to real nationally, globally significant strengths in government's industrial strategy sectors. Listed a few there. We could go into kind of AI and quantum as well, but we're exceptionally strong. We punch well above our weight. Committee would presumably be familiar that we have a nationally leading skills base, both at technical level and at academic level. And that's given us an extremely high employment rate. At the time we were doing the labour market strategy, we had quite literally the highest employment rate in the country outside of the Outer Hebrides. That's not me sort of going over the top. That was what the numbers told us. It's probably moved around a little bit there, but we have an exceptionally high employment rate here in the county. That being said, the productivity problem does loom over Oxfordshire, and we're going to drill into some of these things a little bit more as we go through, but I think it's also worth saying that there are some real consequential decisions and views, I suppose, on what constitutes good growth this place, contrasting, sometimes competing views about what we ought to do to continue to kind of improve Oxfordshire as a place in which to live and work and invest into the future, which is something that we've got at the forefront of our minds. But how do we navigate this? So we drill into those core challenges a little bit more. We are incredibly innovative as a place, one of the most significant places in the world when it comes to innovation. And our innovation assets are distributed quite widely across the county. I think it's fair to say, yes, we have a concentration in Oxford, clearly, but we also have them in the Science Vale. We have various science parks across the county. There's no way of me actually quantifying this, but I'd be willing to bet that we have pretty much the highest rate of science park per capita. I could be wrong on that, but it feels intuitively right to me. So we have distributed innovation, if you like, but the challenge is that innovation doesn't flow through into the wider economy. It's quite concentrated in those industrial strategy sectors. So to give you a pithy example, the logistics sector is perhaps not benefiting from developments in AI and compute in the way that it might, which is a sort of a drag on productivity in some of those sectors. We create an awful lot of value in Oxfordshire, but it's not anchored very well. So we do less well than Cambridgeshire, for example, in terms of capital investment, venture capital investment. That's a drag because with those businesses not being able to access some of those funds, they might struggle to scale, and they're kind of less well positioned to take risk, innovate in terms of their production processes and the services they're offering. And it also gives rise to predation. It's one of those things that means that we struggle to anchor as many of the sort of startups and spin outs that come out of the university as we might. As I say, yeah, we're very good at creating value here in Oxfordshire, exceptionally good at creating it, but are we good enough at keeping it here and ensuring that the benefits of that kind of accrue to Oxfordshire? I would put it to you that we could do better. So this manifests, as I say, in some of the kind of the profits kind of leaking out of the county, with ownership decisions taken sometimes internationally about what goes on here. It means that there isn't that sort of strong connection of local firms and SMEs into value chains, and there's less kind of recycling of value, if you like, into local skills and business capability. And all of that means that, you know, the benefits of the kind of the high-tech growth, the innovation-led growth, again, just don't flow through the local economy in the way that they might, in the way that they could. The misalignment challenge is a really, really interesting one. I think instinctively, I presume the committee will sort of feel this, that the development of housing isn't always as close or as well connected as it could be to areas of economic opportunity, whether that's about education and training or indeed employment. And the proof of that particular pudding is in the log jams, the traffic jams on the A34. That obviously has kind of environmental impact, negative environmental impact. And it means actually that some people don't necessarily or aren't necessarily in the right kind of training or employment for them that they could be in, that would be kind of most beneficial for them and for the economy. This is a sort of about, in some respects, how your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness. So we have an extremely high employment rate, and that's brilliant, but it means that there is little absorptive capacity in the local labour market. We know that there are kind of challenges in some of those technical level skills, and that means businesses can't always scale, they can't always get the talent that they need to grow, and it means that you get people like me who live in Birmingham that kind of commute into to Oxfordshire because we struggle to fill the roles from the local kind of talent pipeline. There's particular pressure in the foundational economy, I think it's fair to say, given that the cost of living in Oxfordshire is very high. We have a lot of churn in the foundational economy, and these sectors are incredibly important to us. I think it's very easy for kind of policymakers, and particularly national policymakers, to get fixated on the IS8 sectors because they're the ones that really drive the big numbers. But actually, it's the foundational economy which is what makes Oxfordshire kind of work, if you like. It's what makes it a great place to live and a great place to be. We know that there is instability in those sectors, whether it's retail, leisure, hospitality, whether it's healthcare, social care, education. We can't always necessarily get the talent that we need in some of those roles, and that ripples then through into the kind of the higher tech innovation led parts of the economy. In that, if you can't get childcare that's a kind of a barrier to you being able to kind of get to work at a particular time, and it might mean you sort of start thinking about part-time employment, or maybe not pursuing your career ambitions because there are those kind of breaks on some of that stuff. And then I think it's fair to say we've got a lot of institutional turbulence. We have government working with us through the Oxford Growth Commission. We have the corridor and the work that Lord Valence is doing. We are presumably now just a few weeks away from knowing what the LGR determination is going to be. That all creates quite a lot of instability and uncertainty, doesn't it? And we know that that's the big thing that businesses hate most of all is uncertainty and turbulence in the way that the system works. So there's a kind of a risk, I suppose, that we're living and breathing at the moment about that sense of momentum and that sense of confidence in what's going on in this place. And until some of those things are resolved, it does act as a bit of a brake on investment, people making kind of employment decisions because we just don't quite know where those chips are going to fall. It means that we are kind of more exposed to some of those headwinds, and particularly what's going on in the Middle East at the moment. And it looks hopefully like that's going to be resolved pretty soon, but there will be a ripple effect from all of that impacts businesses and residents in our place. And the institutional configuration and the uncertainty around it creates, a barrier to being able to resolve some of that stuff at pace. So what are we doing to respond? We're working on it's been an interesting one, actually, as someone who's made their career out of doing local economic strategies. So we've gone through this process across the whole of the counties, where working very closely with the district councils on how might we respond. And given some of that institutional stuff that's going on, we've sort of concluded that the idea of doing a kind of 30-year strategy, typical local economic development strategy, is just exceptionally challenging right now because of some of those contrasting and competing views on what does good growth look like, because we know that the boundaries, if you like, are going to be redrawn. We know that there is going to be a consultation on a development corporation, which is going to have a view on all of this. It's very difficult to think about what the long term looks like. Some of that stuff will play out over the coming years, and we are working on a strategic development, spatial development strategy. So some of those big decisions are in train, but we sort of asked ourselves, well, actually, isn't our immediate response more about what are we going to do now in the next few years, in the short to medium term, to make sure that we're providing the right support for businesses and residents of this place, because they are going to need it. We know that we're facing some very, very sharp economic headwinds. And if we do want to, improve the standard of living for people in this place, then we're going to have to look very, very carefully about, well, what do we do to support in the here and the now while some of those big decisions play out? So not waiting to do things in series, but looking at how we can move things forward in parallel. So this gives a snapshot of the likely shape, or the shape of the investment plan on which we're working. We are working on a pipeline of, I think I totted it up this morning, about 150 million. There's no decisions been taken about this yet. We may sort of reflect that these aren't quite the right objectives for us, and certainly welcome the views of this committee on all of that stuff. But the idea is we try and agree, and I'll come back to decision making shortly. We try to agree some of those high level strategic objectives and start bringing through a pipeline of interventions that sets out quite clearly, this is what we're going to look to do. I should say that the enterprise zone is very much at the forefront of our minds in some of this, and it's really important in that context that we work very closely with our friends and colleagues across the city and district councils to look at how we can start to judiciously, but quite quickly and at pace and scale, invest some of these funds to ensure that we're delivering benefit for our businesses and residents. I think it's particularly important in a place like ours, given the turbulence and the headwinds that we're facing, that we do this collaboratively. I think this is about a kind of a joined up approach. I know from working with city and district council colleagues that we have a shared view that this stuff is all really, really important. I think it's been a really good process so far with economic development professionals that really care about this place to be able to dive quite deeply into our economy and what we ought to do to enable it to develop and to grow. I think part of the challenge is that we have quite a lot of partnerships, and I give you the Oxfordshire Inclusive Economy Partnership as an example, which isn't connected through to delivery. It doesn't have the resource to being able to pull those levers and make a difference. It's more about kind of trying to agree things and work things through in partnership, and that's good. But it's not necessarily sufficient given some of what we're trying to do in this space. again, declare an interest. I'm the interim managing director of Enterprise Oxfordshire. There is an opportunity that we're kind of considering at the moment about, can Enterprise Oxfordshire provide a platform here, not just to deliver projects and programs as it does, but to bring partners together across the public, private and academic sectors to work in harmony, hopefully, to develop up that economic development programme across the county and to deliver it in a more coordinated way than perhaps we've seen in recent years. So there's work in train on all of that. And then I just want to finish off on my presentation with the decision-making timetable. So we are moving at pace on this. This was kind of agreed with the former administration, but sitting down with Councillor Gordon, with the leader, we're really keen to move this forward. We don't want to wait. There's clearly an economic need, and if we can kind of get to the point of being able to make decisions on some of this stuff in July, perhaps it's a sort of a thematic approach rather than drilling right down into the very specific interventions, but try to inject some confidence amongst local partners and, dare I say, the private sector, that we are grappling with this and we're moving it forward at pace. The idea there would be sort of agree a package with a governance approach on all of this that is sustainable going forward. I don't think we're going to get to the point where we can commit absolutely everything all in one go. There is some the way that the enterprise zone works, and it's not just about the enterprise zone, but it is a key part of it. The way the enterprise zone works, the funding flow is dependent on business rate income. That can be kind of variable, clearly. So this is about having a sustainable way of working across the county that we can keep going back to keep committing that resource as it comes on stream, to keep a check of what's actually going on in the economy, making sure that we're designing and delivering interventions that meet those needs and opportunities. So the intention will be to get as far down that path as we can, commit some resource, working with colleagues and through Cabinet in July, and then coming back once we've had some time to develop up the interventions that meet those kind of thematic areas in September. But I would suggest beyond as well. I think this is going to be the work that we try to deliver in a very collaborative fashion in the months and years to come through LGR. Try and lock this in as a sustainable way of working, so that regardless of the outcome that we have, whether it's one boundary, two boundaries, or three boundaries, we've got a way of working here that stands the test of time and tees us up nicely if we do indeed get to the point of entering into a strategic authority. So very, very quick canter through. I hope that contextualises the papers. I will stop there, Chair, and would be very, very happy to take questions.
Thank you. So just a few questions from me on clarification. You describe yourself as the interim managing director. So if you could clarify your status, and also in the paper you talk about a private sector chair is being recruited, and the recommendation will be made to the stakeholder committee on the 16th of June. So I don't expect you to tell us who it is, but just confirm that there is going to be a permanent chair. And like I said, if you could clarify your status, it would be helpful.
Yes, of course. So I was asked when the previous chief executive stepped down. I was asked by first by Martin to step in an interim basis while we figured out which way we wanted to go with some of this. I think it's fair to say that there was a bit of uncertainty about what the right thing to do would be, but we knew we needed to provide a bit of stability for Enterprise Oxfordshire whilst the shareholder committee sort of expressed a view on what that ought to be going forward. So I'm doing that on an interim basis. The contract is actually up at the end of July. I think it's likely, although I wouldn't want to prejudge it, I think it's likely that will be extended. We are in a process at the moment to appoint I'd say permanent, but it'd be a fixed term contract, but essentially a permanent managing director at Enterprise Oxfordshire. We have an interview panel, final stage interview panel on the 29th of June, and then per the company's articles of association, that will go through to be as a recommendation to shareholder committee on the 14th of July. And yes, Chair, pleased to confirm that we have identified a chair. Again, and we're sort of doing that on a kind of a fixed term basis. I would suggest it's good practice actually to have a kind of a fixed term or a term of office for a chair of these things. But we have identified a candidate, and that candidate will be recommended to shareholder committee for approval next week.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon.
To be honest, I was going to just check that that Nick mentioned the MD recruitment, just to make sure that there's no confusion between those two roles. There's the chair role, which will be appointed next week. There's the MD role where the interview process is ongoing, and that role will be appointed on the 14th of July.
So I'm probably stating the obvious, but Enterprise Oxford, then Oxfordshire, is charged with implementing this Metro report. Is that right?
Not quite. So I think there's a question, because we kind of gone through this process, Chair, and sort of felt that actually it's not so much a strategy that we need to adopt, it's more of an investment plan. So we can clarify what are we trying to do in the short to medium terms. It's not quite a strategy as such. I would, without prejudging where we get to through that process, I would anticipate, and again I'll declare my interest, but I would anticipate that there are a number of interventions coming forward through that process at the moment that would best be delivered by Enterprise Oxfordshire. So some elements of what we're talking about in terms of the investment plan, I would anticipate that Enterprise Oxfordshire delivers them, but it could and should well be the case that others are delivered by local government.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. We got any questions for Mr. Glover?
Yeah, one of the things in the covering report, one of the things I find most fascinating is point 21 on page 47, and I'll just read it just for everyone's clarity. Considering a range of competing views on how best to develop Oxfordshire's economy, developing a traditional economic strategy at this time is exceptionally challenging, with little apparent room for consensus to emerge. I'd just be very interested in what that means, you know, providing a bit more meat on the bone to explain what the range of competing views are, who they're held by, and what the key challenges are to moving forward in the context of what you've just written there.
There's a long list, I suppose, that through which we've engaged in this process to date. I think it's fair to say that as we've gone through this process, there are some complex questions about things like land use planning, which are kind of writ large over all of this. So where does housing go? Where does commercial development go? How, therefore, is that connected in to the Oxfordshire economy? Actually, to what extent do we want and need housing growth? Shouldn't we be thinking about where else that could go? What is it that we can do to kind of actively lean into spreading the benefits of the university and the spin-outs? As an example, should we not be thinking about a levelling up type approach where we're actively working with other places to enable our spin-outs to establish themselves elsewhere? And it really, I think, is just a question of frankly, the politics on some of this. Ultimately, you know, you want to go through this process and get political approval for the work that you're trying to do, but it's very clear and you know, the LGR proposals are kind of based, if you like, in large part, in my opinion, on sort of a different view of what the right economic model for this county is. In that context, it sort of became clear that without a single coherent vision of where we're trying to get to, trying to pull a long-term strategy together just becomes very, very difficult. We could have spent quite a lot of time trying to find that consensus, but actually it was, you know, very clear that we'll get an LGR determination that will set some of this out. We will go through the process of consulting on a development corporation. That's clear now per what government's put in the public domain. We are working with colleagues per government's instruction on a strategic development spatial development strategy. I always get that wrong, sorry. So some of that stuff, that big consequential stuff about where is growth going to go, there are a couple of different processes going on in parallel to sort of set some of that out. We felt going through this process, looking at the economics, that it was not our place to prejudge that, and actually it's counterproductive to prejudge some of that and try and create a new product, if you like, that would ride roughshod over some of those different things. Actually, the real priority in the here and the now was making sure that we've got the right packages of support in place for businesses and residents. That felt most urgent, rather than I suppose, an intellectual exercise of trying to set a vision around which it was going to be difficult to get coherence.
Can I just come back and just, you know, you mentioned different points of view there, but didn't ascribe any views to any particular organisations. My point is very much for you in a factual way to describe what those different points of view are and which organisations hold what view and why that's causing conflict. Because I think one of the issues around this is that there are lots of these sorts of high level documents that describe general issues that are being discussed, but the actual core thing that are important to residents and the sort of important points around transparency and decision making is clarity on what the decision makers' actual views are, who holds these views. So it's important to put those on the record.
I think the key thing to which I'd point the committee would be the various different submissions on LGR, which set out fairly clearly sort of quite competing views on what the right economic model for this county ought to be from a spatial perspective. I think that's the kind of the key starting point. We also think it's fair to say that each of the councils in this place has a slightly different view as to what that ought to, and in some cases a fairly significant different view of what growth in this place ought to look like. It's clear that the city is proposing its Greater Oxford model. I think it's fairly clear that other places around the county don't necessarily agree with that. So it's very difficult just in practice to kind of go through a lot of individuals and say what their personal or professional perspective on this is. I think that what is fairly clear is the LGR submissions that have been made to government, and they're all a matter of public record.
Yeah, I mean, if I could come in on that as well. I mean, I think, Laura Gordon, I'm the Cabinet Member for Economy and Environment. And yeah, sorry, I had to step out briefly at a slightly inconvenient time at the point that the agenda item came in. I mean, I think we're essentially in a slightly challenging position at the moment in terms of the sequencing, in that we have the LGR decision, we have the parallel devolution process, both of which are going to put in place structures which will be the ones that really need to take forward any decisions around how we are going to support growth in the long term. At the same time, there are things that we need to be doing now in order to support good growth and in order to make sure that everybody in the county is benefiting from growth. And that means things like addressing housing crisis, transport needs, and so on. Most importantly, I would argue, it means that, we've got these small areas where sort of persistent deprivation, where we have poor education, where we have high concentrations of needs. And although Oxfordshire has managed to grow quite successfully, we have not managed to do it in a way to benefit those people. And I do not believe that we can wait for the LGR and the devolution decisions before we can start putting in place the investment, the productivity investments and so on that would allow those people to benefit from the growth and the productivity that this county is generating. So what we're sort of proposing to do, and I think that's set out at the start of the paper in terms of what the committee's asked to note, is the productivity and investment and productivity plan that was really looking at what we can do over the next 2-year period until the LGR comes in, and really starting to move into prepare for the new structures that will be put in place in terms of whether it's a foundation strategic authority, whether it's a mayoral strategic authority, or whether actually this process doesn't sort of continue. Obviously, we've got changes in government, so we don't know how that's going to affect plans for devolution. So we've got this plan. So what we want to be doing is really setting out how we can be investing now in order to make sure that the growth that we're producing is benefiting everyone in the county. Conscious that a lot of the implementation of these decisions, of any sort of larger, more strategic decisions around the type of growth that we're going for, will be taken forward by other bodies. And we can't really prejudge those because we don't even know what bodies they're going to be yet, let alone who's going to be running them or anything around that.
Thank you. Just to pick up some of the points in the report, loving all this. So pages 54, 55, 57, there are a list of recommendations. So are you supporting these recommendations to Cabinet? And also there's a suggestion to convene a group of, I'm on top of page 60, convene a group of existing elected members to agree delivery principles and mechanisms for economic development across Oxfordshire, and would suggest that's a Cabinet advisory committee so that it has proper status within the council. So the question is, are you supporting the recommendations in this report in your when you report back to Cabinet?
I must apologise, Chair. My version of the report doesn't go out to page 54 or 57, so I'm not sure which bit you're referring to specifically. Apologies. Do you have a
That's okay.
paragraph?
This is the Metro report, and on the Metro report is page 8.
Apologies. Which one of the Metro reports? There were 4 appended.
It's the first one, and it's hang on, so I don't have anything as page 8 of the. Do you mean the conclusion of the?
It's the report after the narrative. So the council number is 53. The Metro page number is 1.
Ah, okay, sorry.
And it takes it from there. But that's where the recommendations are. So I was just wondering whether Mr. Glover is supporting those recommendations in his report to Cabinet.
Broadly, I think this kind of goes back to, and again, declare my interest as Interim Managing Director of Enterprise Oxfordshire. This kind of goes back to the way of working through Enterprise Oxfordshire, in my opinion. I think there's a wealth of evidence from around the world and indeed the UK that these kind of arm's length bodies are kind of most powerful when they are delivering projects and programs at pace and at scale, but also providing that kind of convening platform that the public, private and academic sectors can coalesce around. It's not my decision to make, clearly, but it's a kind of an active topic of conversation at the moment across the county about how best do we use, whether it's Enterprise Oxfordshire or another vehicle, to coalesce around and develop and deliver some of these things at scale and pace.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that these are essentially fairly strong core recommendations. I think my concern reading these, and I think the point that I'll be trying to take forward, sort of as we look through this and make recommendations, is I would like to see a stronger emphasis on the sort of the poverty point and the persistent educational disadvantage point through this report, and I think that's something we'll be trying to think about as we take it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Evans.
Thanks very much. I have a few questions, if I may. The challenge around productivity, which I think most of us would agree on, has been with us for a long time. As a country, we've been talking about it for decades. And I think one of the challenges is that we often can subscribe to quite nebulous ideas about how to improve productivity, but it's hard to really put the specifics to that. So just as an example, could we have 2 or 3 tangible, concrete things that we'd like to see happen following this report and following this work that would improve productivity in Oxfordshire?
Trying to think my best to start with that. So I think there are 2 major things that we will need and are considering as we go forward through all of this. The 2 of the biggest determinants are housing and public transport. There's a lot of work going on that. Last year, Cabinet adopted the Oxrail plan as an example, and there's a lot of work going on to bring forward things like the Cowley branch line. So things like that will make some improvements. There's a real clear rationale for doing more inward investment for supporting and enabling more inward investment into the county. It's very, very clear from the evidence that internationally mobile capital is, often much more productive than your existing base, and you can capture the benefits of that and ensure that it ripples through the supply chain. There's some obvious stuff that we can do there. And there's some really obvious stuff that we ought to be doing as well in terms of business support. Things like high street support would be really, really useful, helpful. More support for high growth businesses. There's quite a lot of that in the county, but it's not necessarily as coordinated as well as it might be. And upskilling programs. There's a real clear need for upskilling programs and providing better access to some of the training. It can be very, very difficult for people physically to move around the county to get access to that. So what is it we can do to work with FE, with colleges to on satellite sites would be a really good example. So a lot of things that we can do to begin to move the dial, but I think it's worth saying in all of this, and you alluded to the long-standing challenge, part of that is because if you think about Oxfordshire's economy, huge, 28 billion, we'll be spending ultimately a small fraction of that to deliver economic development and economic growth. So our kind of ability to move the dial on this is constrained. I think it's worth saying, and an awful lot of it does come down to things like national policy as well. So whilst I'm very kind of positive and enthusiastic that there's a lot that we can and should be doing, I would also probably say we do need to kind of temper our expectations a little, given that what we could wind up investing in some of this is a relatively small amount in the grand scheme of things, and an awful lot of this does come down to national policy.
If I could, thank you for that answer. If I can take both of those points, housing and transport infrastructure, and I acknowledge your point that there's plenty we don't have control over. But let's take an example of somewhere that we do have control over. A big chunk of this is about the Science Vale in the Vale of White Horse and around Didcot, etc. And until quite recently, there was a bus service called the X35 that went from Farringdon, a town of give or take 10,000 people, through Stamford in the Vale, etc., and would go to the Harwell site and ultimately to Didcot. That bus no longer exists. And if you live in these rapidly growing towns like Farringdon or like Stamford in the Vale, which happens to be in my division, a village that's grown quite significantly, it's now harder for you to access from your new build houses, some of which are quite affordable. It's now harder to access good job opportunities at the Harwell site. Now, that is a part of the policy, bus services, that the County Council does have control over. So I do wonder whether or not different parts of the council are talking to each other effectively about how we can achieve these things. Because sometimes we set out grand goals around challenging issues like housing and connectivity, where the council's levers of control are quite limited. But then where we do have the levers ourselves, we don't use them to align with those bigger objectives.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry, Nick. Just to say, those issues have raised the report, and on page 56 of the council numbering, there's recent delivery has been misaligned with employment locations, and I think we can make that a recommendation. The point you make about whether relevant officers actually talking to each other. But thank you. You were going to say something, Mr. Glover.
I think it's a very fair observation. We won't be the only local authority in the country that we're huge organisations that doesn't get this absolutely perfect. So I think it's a really fair observation, and it gives the committee any comfort that these are very live officer level conversations that we have in the Economy in Place team.
Just one final question, if that's okay. So connectivity and digital infrastructure is clearly very important. And in the last civic year, the delegated decisions meetings for the future economy and innovation portfolio, as was, only met once. And when it did meet, there was one item on the agenda, and that was to look at mapping phone signal across the county. That was a £500,000 investment that was signed off at that meeting for that. Do we have any evidence of concrete steps that have been taken subsequent to that investment, which would support this plan around boosting productivity and connectivity?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair. So let me take that away. And I work very closely with Innovate Oxfordshire, and I'm very familiar with some of the work that they're looking at doing on digital connectivity, working with the corridor in particular, and how we can implement better digital connectivity as we're investing at scale in rail, East West Rail, Cali Branch Line, those sorts of things. But let me take that question away, and we'll come back to the committee in writing.
Thank you. Just to say that the response will be shared by all committee members. Councillor Baines.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up some of the issues that Councillor Evans just raised. Firstly, in relation to this idea of people not speaking, parts of the council not speaking to each other. So directly to reference the Science Vale area that was talked about earlier, there was recently a spatial plan, is that right? Movement and place plan that came out for Science Vale. Very little discussion of buses, for example, in there, which directly speaks to the point that Councillor Evans is being made. So there's almost intentional neglect of this kind of critical role that public transport plays in terms of connecting people directly to sources of employment or other areas that people want to travel to spend money and services to access. And similarly, we have a strange situation where we have a 2040 rail plan, but as of yet no plan for buses, and at the moment there is no plan for those to be kind of integrated as one united view for public transport. Similarly, there is a lack of ambition, it seems, from this council to look forward towards public transport franchising, which is absolutely essential for that kind of integrated public transport approach, which would be the thing to unlock productivity. I'm wondering whether you have any sort of view as to that in terms of what international investors expect when it comes to a local authority who is seeking to address these transport issues. And then the second point, if I may, is around, you outlined there that the issues around housing is a key challenge to allowing more people to kind of access jobs and employment, and indeed the poor location previously of housing across the county as being quite far away from sources of employment, etc., and being very car dependent is an issue. How do you envisage those issues and tensions and conflicts being addressed within such a short period of time to unlock these sort of productivity benefits, especially when we have ongoing issues, for example, around the South and Vale local plan?
I'll take them in reverse order, if I may, Chair. I wouldn't expect us to resolve them in the immediate future. Excuse me. Sorry, we're having some building work done, and it's incredibly dusty in here. I wouldn't expect them to be resolved in the immediate future. I think it's fair to say. This is where I kind of again will point back to the creation of new planning authorities through the local government reorganisation process, and potentially in the establishment of the development corporation as well. So I think some of the planning stuff, a technical term, that will play out through some of those processes, and indeed through the establishment of a spatial development strategy. So I think there is clearly processes in place to take views on that, but I think it's I think the evidence that we've gathered through this process will only kind of sharpen the thinking around some of that. In terms of investor views on transport, I think the first thing to say is, having worked in an investment promotion agency, I think international investors would be comforted not only that we have the rail plan and that we are investing in it and that we've secured government investment in it, and that the Growth Commission has responded really positively to it. So I think that's all good stuff from an international investor perspective. But clearly there's more that we can and should be doing to think about this. I think it's interesting perhaps to note that the private sector is leaning into this space. So I'm familiar that, with Milton Park that runs I think its own buses, and there are other developments, the names of which escape me, apologies, that are actively looking at what they can do to support on some of this stuff. I think it's a positive thing that the Ellison Institute is working very closely with us on some of this stuff. So it looks to me that the private sector and the investor community is actively trying to work with us on some of this, which is really good, and we've made some really good progress, but clearly we haven't solved absolutely everything yet.
I mean, I think we can also, especially on issues like the franchising point, which I think is a really important issue that needs to be aired and needs to be thought about. Personally, it's something that I'm very strongly in favour of. But we also need to be very clear that that's the kind of decision which I think can be best taken by whatever type of authority follows through this devolution process. And it was not this council's choice to have these parallel running local government reorganisations and devolution processes, which are greatly complicating our ability to plan in key areas. And I think buses is probably one of the most important areas where it is really difficult to plan. This came to place scrutiny about a year ago, where the really core issue discussed there was, we do not have time to put in place bus franchising before this council will cease to exist. So I think those kinds of things, absolutely, we need to be discussing them. But the fact is that we cannot do it in a meaningful timetable in which this council will still exist in order to be able to carry those kind of decisions through, which is why we need to be, those are the kinds of things that, we can start thinking about as soon as we have clarity about what comes next. In the meantime, what we're hoping to do with the productivity and investment plan is to think about what we can do in the lifetime of this council.
Thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, that leads nicely into the question that I had, which is the recommendations for this paper is that recommendation B, that we have an investment and productivity plan, and the intention is to submit it to Cabinet for approval in July. I'm wondering how the timing of that fits, but I do wholeheartedly support the fact that we really need to get a clear plan fairly soon for, certainly from Enterprise Oxfordshire's point of view, but also from the council's point of view, as to what we hope to achieve in the 2 years that we do have, and what those things that the council hope to achieve and what those things that Enterprise Oxford hope to achieve in those 2 years are clearly defined. Now, my question really is that going to be in this plan, or is there going to be another plan or an updated plan that comes out after LGR, if this is coming before LGR? Because whilst we all think we're getting a decision in July, next Thursday might make a lot of changes. So let's see what happens, and there may be delays. And then if we're all delaying everything because we haven't heard in July and it's all gone to a further timetable, I think we need clarity on council operations and council interventions versus Enterprise Oxford's interventions. So clarity around that, please.
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Good to see you again. Yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? I think as we've gone through this process, I have sort of preached the gospel of we've got to try and do this in an LGR agnostic way, by which I mean, let's not take a view on where the boundaries might be redrawn, and let's kind of try and fix our minds on what we should just be getting on and doing anyway, because there's a clear evidence base of need and opportunity. So I think that holds. I think there is a keen logic for us to be trying to move this forward. We've got the evidence base that sort of says where the kind of the opportunity places might be in the county. We've got the evidence base that tells us what the sorts of interventions we ought to be prioritising and focusing in on the short to medium term ought to look like. And I would put it to the committee that that's clear and compelling enough that we should just be trying to move it forward anyway, particularly as we have access to enterprise zone resource. So whether we get an LGR determination in the next few weeks or not, wherever the boundaries wind up being redrawn, that we should have a clear approach to doing this over the next couple of years at very least. Because it's not just about LGR, there are other kind of consequential things going on to do with the Development Corporation and potentially devolution as well. So we've got to keep our eye on all of these things. It's probably also worth saying my view on this as someone who's put enough of these things in place over the course of my career has been, I think that kind of traditional strategy plan making process, if you do it once and then it sort of sits there for a couple of years while you get on with it, we don't have the benefit of that kind of certainty anymore. Particularly because the way that the enterprise zone works, as I sort of tried to explain, we have a kind of a pretty robust forecast of what that looks like, but we could do better, we could do worse. So being able to kind of keep going through this process on an iterative basis to look at what we should be investing in, what does the evidence in the real economy tell us we ought to be prioritising, how much resource do we actually have to call into this. I think we kind of lay a marker down for July, but try and codify a kind of a way of working so this is sustainable and repeatable, because that I think is going to be important whether or not we get an LGR determination. There are too many other headwinds that we're trying to navigate. So I'd say this is about trying to lock in as best we can a collaborative, collegiate way of working where we can keep being based on evidence and insight, keep being abreast of where the funding sources are. We frankly need to get a little bit better across the whole of the county at winning new resource as well, pulling all of that in and making sure that we've got a kind of live economic development program rather than just a static economic development plan.
Right, so if the committee's content, I'll move into what I've heard in terms of recommendations. Oh, sorry, Councillor Middleton, getting ahead of myself.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be a lone voice here anyway, but I've got some concerns and some comments. Essentially, that the whole premise of the report is that growth is essential. Rather than whether we don't seem to be testing whether that remains true in a climate constrained world, and we are a council that has a climate change emergency. So I would feel that before we commit to a productivity plan, we should be establishing what the outcomes are that we're trying to achieve and whether perpetual growth is the best route to achieving them. The report acknowledges sustainability and climate resilience, but treats them largely as constraints to be managed rather than fundamental limits to shaping the economy that we're trying to achieve. I mean, it includes discussion of growth sectors, total emissions aren't included, neither is resource consumption, climate adaptation risks. I mean, I suppose I'm leaning towards donut economics here, and there doesn't seem to be very much reference to that. There is reference to housing affordability problems, transport pressures, labour shortages, infrastructure deficits, uneven distribution of prosperity. But again, the answer to that is growth. And we've experienced decades of economic growth in Oxfordshire, and we've still got these problems. So, do we know whether growth is going to intensify those problems or solve them? So the question is, what evidence demonstrates that additional growth will reduce those pressures rather than exacerbate them? And the final point I had was that there is a little bit of conflation in this between productivity and growth, and they're obviously not the same thing. Just because if we're growing our economy doesn't necessarily mean we're going to improve productivity. In fact, the two things can be, working against each other. So it's really just trying to sort of lay out some of those principles, really, and that I'm always very suspicious, shall I say, of any strategy that just says growth, growth, growth. I mean, we've got arguably a government that's hung its entire existence on the idea of growth, which hasn't really happened, and we've seen the outcome of that. So, I really do think as a council, with saying we have climate runs through everything we do, there needs to be a little bit more tempering, I think, of the ambitions in this report and the future direction of the council in terms of not just focusing entirely on growth and looking at some of the underlying factors behind that and how we're going to deal with those.
Maybe if I can come in on that first, and
Please
then
do.
Nick, if you come in. I mean, I think firstly, Councillor Minton, I think can we thank you for answering Councillor Baines's question from earlier on who disagrees, because I think it, and also for the opportunity, I think it's really important to state that we do believe that growth is essential, and that is a really important marker to put down. I mean, the fact is that although this is a relatively wealthy country, we do have people that are not currently sharing in that prosperity, and the growth is the route to which we can enable those people the right kind of growth, good growth, inclusive growth, green growth. But that growth is the way that we enable those people to participate in that prosperity that many people in this county are able to enjoy. I think that's really important, and I think it's really important to state that clearly. I think I'll allow Nick to expand a little bit more on productivity, because he's able to do it much more eloquently than I am. But I think sort of the productivity, I think what this report and what this approach is trying to set out is that we see productivity growth as our route to good, inclusive, green growth. And Nick, I think handing over to you at that point.
Thanks, Laura. I sort of I completely understand where this comes from. I think it's the first thing to say. And I will apologise up front for those areas where I've conflated kind of productivity and growth. That's an error on my part. As we've gone through this whole process, and if you'll forgive me for sort of going policy wonk on you all for a moment, I wanted to be quite clear that this isn't just about increasing the quantum of output. This isn't just about growth. This is about economic development. This is fundamentally about how do we improve people's quality of life and standard of living. So it's not just about kind of growth at any and all costs by any stretch of the imagination. This is about trying to be as sensitive as humanly possible to Oxfordshire as a place. It is an amazing place. I've worked here for a year or so now, and I'm constantly positively surprised by the layers of richness and the incredible things that go on in this place. And as I say, living and working in Birmingham most of my career, we would have given, when I was doing economic development in Birmingham, we would have given our right arm for any one of the things that this place has. So we've got to treat them incredibly carefully and sensitively as we go through this. And it is very much about developing the place rather than just growing it at any and all costs. So I think that's the kind of the first thing to say. We really carefully, at the outset of this process, we really carefully considered some of the other kind of elements of all of this, if you like, because I was very, very kind of keenly aware that the donut economics piece, the environmental sustainability pieces are so important to this place. And actually, in a lot of senses, you've identified there are some real constraints on things like water in this place that we need to think really, really carefully about. Part of the conclusion that we've reached on this is that some of these things are so important that they kind of need. What we didn't want to do is try and bundle everything together, so it tries to say everything and actually kind of concludes nothing in doing that. It's really important the work that we're doing on biodiversity net gain, the local the LAEP. I can't quite remember what the acronym stands for, but some of these things are so important that they've got their own resource base, their own kind of processes and projects going on in all of that. It felt right as we went through this that we take a kind of a keener, narrower focus on the economics, which is not to say that we just kind of deliver this and put our fingers in our ears and pretend that none of that other stuff is going on. I think it does come back to that point about internally, as we're developing and delivering this stuff, better alignment, better join up of some of what we're actually trying to do becomes all the more important. And it's where the donut economics piece really kicks in from my perspective, because that's about, well, what interventions do we want to deliver, and how do we make sure, as not only we're making a decision about whether we do an intervention, but as we're designing it from a blank sheet of paper, that we have those considerations and those concerns very much at the forefront of our mind. So as we go through this process and we're sort of saying, these are what the business support programs we think we need are, these are what the skills programs we think we need are, as we get to the point of like actually committing some resource, it's about making sure that we've designed those interventions with the donut model in mind, making sure that we've got the future generations piece very much at the forefront of our mind. It's very difficult to apply them to a kind of strategy or a plan, but they absolutely need to be applied to the specific interventions that we want to deliver.
I think also another aspect to pick up, I think, is that you sort of specifically mentioned the housing and the transport, and I think essentially those problems is what the approach and the strategy in the Metro Dynamics report is trying to respond to, sort of really drawing out the way in which the distribution of housing growth, for example, has driven people into these very long commutes, which are both very bad for their well-being, but also very bad for the environment, and exacerbated some of these problems that we have around affordability, access to jobs, exclusion from educational opportunities, and so on. And so I think although, I mean, perhaps there is a point about whether it can be brought more explicitly to the fore in some of the aspects of the reporting, I would argue that the approach that we're taking is sort of inherently in line with that approach, in that it is attempting to address or move towards addressing, because none of this is going to be something, it's not something that we can do quickly, it's something that's going to take a long time, is thinking about how we can move in a direction that sort of avoids those issues in future, but also mitigates them for given the existing sort of spatial dynamics, and that is essentially what the approach is. I mean, that's why we're doing it. That's what the approach is for. And I think, perhaps there is a point about how we can be more explicit about there being sort of environmental as well as well-being benefits to that. But I would argue they are nevertheless there.
Yeah, I mean, good points. Take those points. I'm just concerned that the report doesn't seem to have very much analysis of things like total emissions, resource consumption, climate adaptation risks, and rather than measuring our success primarily through growth and productivity, there should be metrics for well-being, health inequality reduction, biodiversity recovery, and carbon reduction. So I think if we can add those in somewhere, or those measures are going to be incorporated into this proposal, then, you know, I think that's going to give us a much better measure of success rather than, you know, we've achieved growth or productivity.
Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of comments from me. I think this is probably one of the most important areas that actually this council's responsible for. And I feel, if I'm being completely brutally honest with you, Nicholas, it doesn't feel like an area that we take seriously. Now, you've done a great job today and spent a good hour answering all our questions. It's disappointing Robin, as the director, isn't here. But the report, particularly the annex with the sort of summary and next steps, I mean, it is just officer speak, like Copilot, ChatGPT. I just, you know, we want the public to get on board with our growth plan. Growth is coming, whether we like it or not. It's happening. It's a key factor for our, you know, national importance in terms of that Oxford to Cambridge arc, which the government are rightly championing. We've got, you know, look at like West Oxfordshire, for example. I mean, it's the same stuff we've been talking about for a decade. Or we need to improve the A40. We had an opportunity to improve the A40, and this council decided not to do it. So there's no point just keeping it in reports. It talks about RF Prize and Autumn, but there's just no real substance and detail. And I don't know if that's to come and whether this should be an item that comes back to this committee, or I'm happy to look at it at place. But I think we've really got to keep officers' feet to the fire with this, because a lot of this stuff, I'm sorry, is stuff that's been kicking around for the past 10 years and really lacks progress. You know, you've got the stuff in Danbury and Bicester. Again, it's just very vague. Talks about, you know, Bicester Motion is huge. What's going on at Bicester Motion? Who's been there? Who's going there? Who's having those conversations? Rail connectivity. We've got a theme park coming to Charwell. You know, these are massive things that we need to be embracing, and it just feels like the sort of the local economy is running ahead of this authority, and we're just left, you know, not really knowing what's going on. There was a massive farming not conference, but it's called Cereals, that just happened in Jeremy Clarkson's farming area. Did anyone from the county go to that and contribute and have those conversations? And you're nodding, but we don't hear back from that. So it's sort of the KPIs, and actually from a scrutiny point of view, what are we really looking at? What are we challenging you on to say, why haven't you delivered that? And what's your sort of forward vision? I know this says over the next 3 years. I think that's too long. I think you need to be looking over the next year. What's this council going to do? Because the local economy is moving at such an alarming rate now, of all the housing growth, theme parks, businesses, which is great, but we need to be embracing that and making it clear, actually, what can this council do to support that growth?
I'm really conscious of time, Chair, so I'll try and come back on that really quickly. Partly just to say, like, I agree. I agree. I think as we've gone through this process, it's been very, very clear that not just the county council, but across the whole of the county, we probably under-resource economic development. Part of the challenge there is it's quite fragmented, so the jams spread quite thinly, if you will. But I would agree with you. I think we under-resource key areas like data and intelligence. I'm really pleased that at Enterprise Oxfordshire we found slack in the budget to bring in ahead of him with investment and some sector leads, only 2 of them, but precisely so that we've got some resource and some capacity that can go out there and be engaging on the county's behalf, county council's behalf, with some of those businesses, with some of those key employers in key sectors. That's really positive. But I would agree with you. I think we can and should be doing an awful lot more. And part of the work on the investment plan is to really surface that, so that we can start to commit some of that resource, make sure we've frankly got some of that core capacity and capability in the right places, make sure that we've got really robust, not just well-written, well-meaning strategies and plans that kind of sound great, but that get really right down to the brass tacks of smart objectives, key results, so that we can measure this, so that we can hold each other and ourselves to account for performance. I think there is definitely more work to be done on all of that space.
If I could just come in for 1 minute as well, literally one. I mean, I would say, like, I think that the productivity investment plan, the purpose of that is looking at what can be done over this time period and given all of the uncertainty. But I would also say, I know Nick had told me yesterday how much he loves scrutiny. My view is that given the many political changes that we're likely to have in the changes of forms of government and so on, it is really important that this is kind of scrutinised from people from all parties and that we get in those contributions, because fundamentally taking this forward, we don't know who's going to be taking this forward. And what we really don't need is wrenching changes in terms of the approach. So I think, Nick has said that he welcomes it, and as do I.
Thank you. So back to the recommendations. It's okay. So I think, Councillor Gordon, you're probably the first cabinet member to have the word economy in her title. Okay, second. Well, what I'm saying is it's as something that we need to embrace as a county council. We're coming at this a bit late. So the recommendations that I've written, but like I said, happy to have them challenged and added to, is that economic development goes up the agenda. And I think Nick used the words about using data intelligence just more effectively. I also think, picking up on Councillor Evans, that we need specific examples of how productivity is relevant to local residents. It's all very well having this global overarching stuff. The question is, what's it mean to me? And specifically looking at green growth examples, picking up on what Councillor Middleton raised. Something about the misalignment with public transport and employment locations, and that has to be considered by the county council. We've got, a very good officer looking at buses, but perhaps his work needs to be seen in a wider context. There's something about having a rail plan standing alone from a bus plan, and whether there needs to be more synergy between those two things. And something about the report taking on board Ian's points, Councillor Middleton's points about in a climate constrained world, and we need more metrics on things like well-being, and you came out with a list.
For a change, I've actually written something that basically the Cabinet ensures that the forthcoming Oxford Investment and Productivity Plan explicitly evaluates alternative economic frameworks, including well-being economy, community wealth building, post-growth approaches, and demonstrates how any proposed growth is compatible with Oxfordshire's climate, biodiversity, and nature recovery commitments. So I can send that to you, Tom, if that's agreed.
Excellent. And in the report, there's talk of convening a group of existing elected members to a degree, delivery principles and mechanisms for economic development across Oxfordshire. And I'd certainly ask the committee to support that as well. Are there any other recommendations for the committee? Yes, Councillor Batstone.
Yes, there's no mention here of farming or the rural economy. And I think, particularly in productivity terms, it may not be in growth terms, but in productivity terms, agriculture, for example, is very important to Oxfordshire. It takes an awful lot of our land area. So I think it needs to be addressed in some way.
It's a major omission from this report, and we'll put that forward as a recommendation. Any other recommendations from any other members? No, thank you. So can I thank you, Councillor Gordon and Nick, for coming here today and answering all our questions. And it's been a revelation working with your builders and being entertained by your daughter. Thank you. So moving on to the work programme, agenda item 10. Anybody got any comments on the future work programme? Councillor Baines.
Yeah, only to emphasise the importance of considering and integrating where as much as is possible and appropriate, consideration of LGR and devolution as we move forward through those processes, because as we've discussed before at this committee, it's likely that things will move very quickly, especially over the next 6 to 9 months. So we'll need to keep an open mind in terms of how those work as part of our forward work programme.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Batstown.
Yes, I realise LGR is important, but I think we shouldn't emphasise it too much at this stage, because what I don't want is officers to waste a lot of time on LGR proposals which don't come to fruition. So I think we've got to be very careful about the amount of resource we put into LGR before we're clearer about what's going to happen.
That's the point that Councillor Baines was making. We should have a minded to recommendation mid-July. So that's when we really will have to consider the implications for all our services across the county. Thank you. So just going through the agenda, item 9, 10 and 11. Anybody want to make any comments on those papers? In which case, I thank you for your attendance and for your perceptive questioning. Much appreciated. I close this meeting.